everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, November 8th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then, we will head over to Allen, where he speaks with Dr. Mei Wang, Chief Technology Officer of IoT Security at Palo Alto Networks, where they discuss ML and AI adoption within the field of cybersecurity, how it has impacted her day-to-day, and what role she plays in advancing its utility within the industry as threats constantly evolve. Allen will then talk to Dr. Vinod Vasudevan, CEO at Flytex, to talk about how Flytex is helping some of the biggest brands in the world like Samsung, Nokia, and Oracle, amongst others, to maximize their customer lifetime value. Then Allen will sit down with Mark Boucher, CEO and founder of Unito, where they will talk about how Unito completed $20 million in funding, led by the CDPQ, that will allow Unito to solidify its growing market traction. We will then be airing episode 2 of our series, The CD Pipeline. For the second episode, hosts Alan Schimmel and Lori LaRusso are joined by Mark Waite of CloudBees and Darren Pope of CloudBees, as they dive into various Jenkins topics, including modernizing the UI, security, community contributions, and more. We are following that up with episode 34 of DevOps Unbound. In this episode, hosts Alan Schimmel and Mitch Ashley are joined by Jonathan Boswell of Tricentis, Tracy Reagan of DeployHub, and Mike Rothman of Techstrong Research, talk about how to develop an effective cloud testing strategy, the different types of testing you need to consider when shifting to the cloud, how to shorten your testing cycle, and how cloud testing can accelerate your digital transformation. Then we go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike Vizard spoke with Patrick Sheehan, Chief Revenue Officer for Phylum, where Patrick explains how secure software supply chains are using open source software in real time. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on and tell us more about some of our upcoming webinars. Next up, we are airing episode 3 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. After that, we have an episode of Techstrong Research Review. In this episode, Mike Rothman and Mitch Ashley discuss the recent Dropbox breach, what Mitch saw at the recent KubeCon show, trends for the upcoming Predict 2023 conference, and more. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Ravid Circus, Chief Product Officer for Simplicity, as Ravid explains why the current challenging economic climate will require cybersecurity teams to change the way they collaborate. Then Mike will interview Daniel Thanos, Vice President of Arctic Wolf Labs, as Daniel explains why multi-factor authentication fatigue has already set in, despite best cybersecurity intentions. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines from November 8th. First up, in the wake of Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, Mastodon, a decentralized social network, has grown to over 1 million active monthly users. More and more people are switching to this new social platform after concerns about changes to Twitter's functionality and protests against Twitter's new paid verification option. Prior to the purchase, Mastodon received around 60 to 80 new user registrations per hour, but has since grown into the thousands. Mastodon acts similarly to Twitter by using hashtags, replies, and a feature similar to retweeting. However, it is ad-free and distributed across thousands of servers, which makes it almost impossible for one entity to purchase it. Next, the European Commission has proposed rules for short-term rental platforms with the hopes that it will boost rental transparency and address several other issues. While the peer-to-peer rental platforms are popular options for European cities, They face opposition from residents of cities with high amounts of tourism for driving up housing costs. This proposal will include rules meant to improve the collection of data between hosts and rental platforms, which will help inform local policies to tackle the challenges while also retaining the benefits of the online short-term rental sector. In other news, Apple is reportedly working on simplifying its digital assistant trigger phrase to just Siri, which they plan to eventually roll out sometime next year. Apple has spent the past couple of months training Siri to respond to just one word, as it requires a lot of AI training. It is much easier to understand two-word trigger phrases in multiple accents and dialects. By working on this feature, Apple seeks to catch up with Amazon's Alexa, which already uses a one-word trigger phrase. Zooming out, digital assistants have seen many changes recently, as companies have been trying to integrate them deeper into third-party apps and services, while also improving their ability to understand users and process their commands. Next up, the U.S. Department of Justice has announced that they have seized $3.36 billion of Bitcoin from a man who has unlawfully obtained it over the dark web. The perpetrator pleaded guilty to committing wire fraud all the way back in September of 2012. This plea comes after a year after law enforcement recovered over 50,000 Bitcoin from its residence. This has been one of the biggest mysteries for the DOJ in the past 10 years, with it being the largest cryptocurrency seizure at the time and the second largest currently. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at research that shows nearly a third of CISOs or IT security leaders in the US and UK are considering leaving their current roles. Out of this group, the main reason was a lack of work-life balance, citing CISO burnout, which the article then takes a look at. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. On Container Journal, we have an article looking at how to support your Kubernetes cost tuning. As teams move to the clouds or run bigger workloads on Kubernetes, one thing becomes immediately apparent, that running Kubernetes costs money. However, with a proper strategy, saving money on your Kubernetes bill is possible. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article looking at GitPod's announcement of an API to make cloud development environments more extensible. GitHub has stated that the API will make it easier to build plugins for these CDEs. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another Techstrong TV session here. I'm really happy to have a new guest, first-time guest on our show today. This is Dr. May Wang, and she's with Palo Alto Networks. Dr. Wang, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you very much, Alan, for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you on. So, well, I introduced you as Dr. Wang, so obviously that cat's out of the bag. People know a little bit about you. But why don't you tell them a little bit of your story, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. My name is May Wang, and I'm the CTO for IoT security at Palo Alto Networks. I joined Palo Alto Networks about 3 years ago through an acquisition of a startup called Zingbox. And I was the co-founder and CTO for Zingbox, where we provided IoT security solutions based on machine learning.
Excellent. And so you're CTO for IoT, and look, this is an area where we're seeing, I forgot what the latest number I saw was, by 2025, there'll be 55 billion devices, something like that, connected.
Yeah, there are all kinds of predictions, estimations, but one thing we know for sure is there are increasing amount of IoT devices in this world. And based on different estimations, there are roughly about the number of IoT devices we have now in the world is about twice amount of the total world population. Somewhere around the lowest estimation is about 11 billion, and some higher estimation about 14 billion somewhere.
Of IoT devices, right? Because there's about 7 billion people. But that number it's not plateauing. That number is, on a ski hill kind of incline in terms of going up.
Yeah, it's definitely increasing dramatically every year. And with this huge amount of IoT, actually at every second, we're seeing more and more devices connected online. For example, in healthcare, we're seeing about 40% of new medical devices are connected online compared to several years ago, only 20% of new medical devices are connected online. Yeah.
Absolutely. We were interviewing someone in healthcare security a couple of weeks ago, 2 months ago. And they basically said, look, there are 3 networks at every healthcare facility, every hospital. One network is sort of your traditional IT network. The printers are on there, the AP team, AR, your traditional office kind of workers. A second network is just the IT devices. Everything from the IV pump to the MRI to the heart monitors and all these things. They almost demand their own network now because they're all networked. And then thirdly is kind of the doctors and those people, because they don't follow any rules, and you can't afford to put them onto let's say the IoT networks, because that's mission critical stuff. And so the challenge in healthcare is you got to manage 3 different networks, and it's hard enough managing one network, frankly. But that's just one example. Manufacturing, science and technology beyond healthcare. Even at the home, I have near 50 IP addresses used at my house. I have one house. It's my wife and I, right? What do we need 50? I happen to look in my router, look at my router tables at devices. There are 50 devices connected there. Right? And, some of them are the usual suspects, computer, phone, or tablet, but most of them aren't. They're the refrigerator and the audio and the TV and, all these devices. So,
and in most households, they don't have a IT expert like yourself.
No, I know. What do they do?
Yeah, these IoT devices are being used by, everyday people. They not necessarily have the IT expertise or security expertise. Even in enterprises or organizations like hospitals, lots of IoT devices are actually brought in not by the IT department. They can be brought in by finance and procurement, facility, or even in hospital, we call them biomed or bioengineering team, who are in charge of these medical devices, but not necessarily they have the expertise of IT or security. And lots of these devices, because they're specialized medical devices, IT department is not even allowed to touch these devices. Absolutely. So who's going to be in charge of the security of these IoT devices is a big question, actually. Lots of challenges.
Well, and also the nature of these devices, Dr. Wang, have changed too, right? Back when I first got into security, for instance, I remember going to the U.S. Geological Survey, Department of Interior, and talking to them about securing. They have sensors on the top of the mountains and on the bottom of the ocean to sense for earthquakes and stuff like this. And we talked to them about securing those sensors, and they were aghast. Right? Why would we secure them? We want them to be open. This is science. Right? No one's going to hack them. No one's going to bother them. But you know what? People do. They can. Today's IoT devices have a lot more headroom. They're made to be updated over the net. And it's a double-edged sword. That also gives people a chance to go in there and do bad things.
Yeah, exactly. And also, hackers can leverage these IoT devices as a stepping stone as well to get into your critical infrastructure, to get into your sensitive data. And also, when these IoT devices are hacked, we're not only talking about privacy and data leakage, etc. Because lots of these IoT devices are in critical infrastructure. So when these devices are hacked, we're talking about life or death. Where, especially in healthcare and in critical infrastructure IoT devices, it can really interrupt operations and business.
It could happen in a centrifuge factory trying to spin up uranium even or something like that.
Yeah, there are plenty of examples here.
It's happened.
Dr. Wang, though, we want to talk a little bit today, though, about what's the future of securing these devices utilizing AI and ML. And look, AI and ML are too loaded. There's only 2 letters, but there's a lot of controversy. Are they real? Are they not real? Is it ready for prime time? Not ready? When's it going to be ready? I'm interested in your take on this.
Yeah, Alan. So we all know there are lots of increasing amount of attacks. Based on the data we can see from Palo Alto Networks, we actually see 3 times more attacks compared to a couple of years ago before COVID era. I think it's because this whole pandemic situation really expedited the digital transformation. Lots of things, lots of operations, lots of activities are forced to move online. So now we're talking about more people are connected online, more devices are connected online, people stay longer online, people are doing more activities online. So not surprisingly, the number of attacks is increasing as well. So facing all these increasing amount of attacks, more complicated attacks, and more advanced attacks, how we are going to protect our devices, our users, our data. And we need something that can provide automatic protection, that we need something that can scale up to tens of billions of devices. And we also need something that can prevent zero-day attacks from happening. So the traditional signature-based security itself is not enough anymore. So we need a new tool, a better tool. That's where machine learning comes in very handy. Machine learning has been applied in multiple other areas like image processing, natural language processing, but we still yet to see the full potential of machine learning in cybersecurity. We believe at Palo Alto Networks here, we believe AI machine learning is the future. As we said, we are seeing so many devices, so many users coming online. One good part about that is at the same time, we're also seeing huge amount of data, especially coming from these devices, these IoT devices, that we're seeing huge amount of data that we either couldn't see before or we couldn't see in such real time. And we know machine learning, their favorite candies are data. So we feed this huge amount of data into our machine learning models so that we can train these models to better detect these devices, to better detect abnormal behaviors. And we think data and machine learning are the future for cybersecurity. And I can certainly, Alan, I can certainly talk about the unique challenges we're seeing when we apply machine learning to cybersecurity. I can also talk about common challenges machine learning apply to all areas, but these challenges can be more severe in cybersecurity. From our years of applying machine learning to real world, to real field, to protect lots of customers, lots of data, lots of users, and lots of devices, we actually summarize the unique challenges when we are applying machine learning to cybersecurity. I'm happy to share that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not even whether I'm interested, it's whether they're interested. And I tell you they are interested. Now, look, this is a topic we're not going to cover in a 15-minute interview exhaustively, right? Can we, Dr. Wang, is there a place we could send our audience to at least start kind of digging in here and really understanding these issues and possibilities. You can't defend what you don't know. You got to know, right, in order to get smart with it. Give if you wouldn't mind, a roadmap for our folks, our audience to get started.
Yeah, sure. I actually happy to share from high level perspective what machine learning can do in cybersecurity and what are the challenges we're facing when we apply machine learning to cybersecurity. Then, of course, you're very welcome to check out paloaltonetworks.com, that we have tons of materials, documents, videos, talk about machine learning to cybersecurity, because now we're basically applying machine learning to almost every single product from Palo Alto Networks for cybersecurity. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So if you don't mind, and if it's too much right now, maybe we can come back to it a second time. But give us a start off for people at a high level.
Yeah, sure. As we mentioned, so we do find from not only from the research from our research lab, but also from the very broad deployment at our customer base, that we do find that machine learning can be extremely helpful when it comes to detecting zero-day attacks, when it comes to automatic identify devices, profile devices, and detect abnormal behaviors. Just give you several quick examples. For example, the first thing, actually, when we talk to lots of customers, lots of them are very interested. The first question they're very interested in is, can you tell us how many devices I have on my campus at any given moment? Because their devices come and go, their devices brought in by different departments, their devices not managed by IT department at all. And people used to use Excel sheet, or people get onto floor twice a year to check out their inventory. And we know, given today's dynamic environment, that's not enough and takes huge amount of manual effort. So from machine learning, we actually can automatically, once you deploy our software, we can automatically identify and profile what are the devices connect onto your network, what these devices are, and give you very accurate asset management inventory at any given moment. And because, as Alan, as you know, there can be so many different kinds of devices. They use different hardware, different software, different applications, different protocols, etc. So it's very important to have this real-time and dynamic and accurate identification can tell you what devices you have on your campus connect to your network. And the second one is, once you can accurately identify these devices, it's very important to profile these devices. For example, even though you see two Windows systems, one of them can be your laptop, the other can be an X-ray machine that's controlled by Windows. And only when you know what these devices are, you can accurately profiling these devices, you know what kind of policies you should put in. You know what these devices should do. If it's your laptop, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Facebook, you can go to shopping sites, Netflix, whatever. But if it's a Windows system controlling X-ray machine, you better not do those things. You should block all those activities. So because we are able to use machine learning to automatically identify these devices, profile these devices, so we can actually use machine learning to build up a baseline for each device. So whenever there's abnormal behaviors happens, we can easily catch them, identify them, and catch them. So the second one is automatic anomaly detection. And the third one is the zero-day detection. You know, in our traditional security network, we takes time to build signature. You have to see this attack, see this malware once, and then you build signature. And hopefully, if it happens again, you can capture it. But now, especially for IoT security, we just cannot afford for these attacks to happen even once. We have to catch zero-day attacks. That's where this device identification, profiling, build up the baseline behavior matters so much. So as soon as you see any early sign of abnormal behaviors, you can easily detect it and catch it. And the fourth one is for machine learning, it's hard for human beings to scale up to billions of devices, especially given we're in such shortage of security experts and IT experts, etc., and hard to train these talent to keep up the latest attacks and latest technologies. So, but machine learning is actually, once we apply it in, say, for example, we figure out what's the right thing to do for this group of surveillance cameras, then we can easily scale it up to millions of other similar surveillance cameras to protect them. And the fifth one is actually the most important one. Because we can identify these devices, we can profile these devices and do automatic anomaly detection. We can do zero-day attacks. We can scale up the solution using machine learning. The fifth one is policy recommendation. After we know about these devices, we need to give actionable recommendations to our customers. What shall we do about these vulnerabilities, about these attacks? What are the recommended policies we should put around these devices or users or applications? And even nowadays, still lots of policy recommendations takes lots of manual efforts, and lots of new policy recommended can shadow the old policy, can be conflicting with the old policy, while machine learning have the intelligence by feeding into huge amount of data. They can automatically learn from other scenarios. They can figure out what will be the best policy recommendations for this particular user, for this particular device, for this particular application. So there's just so many benefits and so many advantages machine learning can bring to cybersecurity. I can just keep talking, go on and on, but in our website, we actually have even more examples, use cases, and details that everybody can welcome to check it out.
And you can get there from PaloAltoNetworks.com?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. Dr. Wang, unfortunately, these are relatively short interviews. I wish we had more time. I have a feeling maybe if we have any IoT security topics at one of our virtual events coming up, we might have to invite you in and explore this further. But for now, we're going to have to call a wrap. I want to thank you so much for coming on here on Techstrong TV and explaining this to our audience. I hope you guys at home got this. Go check it out on the website for more. And Dr. Wang, please come back and keep educating us. We need this. So it's all good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Alan. If people have particular interest in for machine learning to cybersecurity, actually, we just published a blog. If you just search the future of machine learning for cybersecurity, Palo Alto Networks, you can see the blog is relatively short, and we provided insights about applying machine learning to cybersecurity.
So go check that out as well. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in a minute here on Techstrong TV. Stand by.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I have a new guest who's never been on our show before to introduce you to. His name is Dr. Vinood Vasudevan. And if I mispronounce it, I apologize. I practiced a whole bunch before, but I do the best I can. Dr. Vasudevan, thanks for joining us on Techstrong TV.
Oh, thank you.
And if it's okay,
Nice to have you here. If it's okay, I'm going to call you Vinood. And Vinood, why don't we start off with maybe a little bit of your background for our audience?
Alan, thanks. That's fine. Just call me Vinod. That makes it very easy for everyone, including the listeners and the viewers. I come from a technology background. I did my bachelor's, master's, and computer and PhD in neural networks from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And then I have progressed in my career from basic research through applied research into commercial activities. And I've sort of alternated between large corporations and small enterprises and startups. I worked at NTT in Japan, at Reliance Communications in India, which are very large corporations. Worked in a research lab in Singapore, did my first startup in the early 2000s in the Bay Area. And this is my second startup now, where I am talking to you from.
Perfect. That is a well-rounded resume, CV right there. So that's great. Well, you mentioned you're at your second startup now. Is it in the Bay Area? I assume it's in the Bay Area, or?
No, this is based in Netherlands.
Ah, okay.
My first startup was in the Bay Area, and this one is in Netherlands.
So Japan, Singapore, India, the Bay Area, Netherlands. You've seen the world.
Yes, I have. I can't deny that. I have been around the world. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Myself too, especially since starting DevOps.com, about 8 or 9 years ago, I get a chance to go around the world. As a matter of fact, we'll be in Amsterdam in April for the KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. Europe is going to be in Amsterdam in April, and looking forward to it. It was supposed to be in Amsterdam 2 or 3 years ago, right when COVID.
I guess it was 2020, and so they're coming back. Anyway, let's talk about this new startup.
In person.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be doing video live from the event, so if you're there, come in and we'll sit down and do a live stream video. But let's talk about the new startup, if you wouldn't mind. Share with our audience a bit.
This startup, what we call Flytext, I started several years ago, and basically the problem hit me, or the problem started wrangling me when I was working in my previous job at Reliance Communications, and then the problem was basically that you saw across many enterprises where the transition from a focus on having large number of customers to a focus on getting revenue and profits out of those customers was always a big struggle for the industry. We saw that in the .com industry, we saw that in the telecom industry, in the banking industry, and of late we see it in the fintech industry. At Reliance, we had launched a kind of an app store walled garden service. This is in around 2003. And that was initially was free of charge because we just wanted to acquire customers and usage. And very quickly, we reached about 1 billion transactions per month.
Wow.
And this is in India. India is a huge country, so here you had a lot of people using it too. But the moment we started charging, the usage sort of it came down like this.
Sure.
And then we had to struggle for several years with trial and error to sort of bring it back to a semblance of profitability. And when you look around, there is so much information and data about the customers, and maximizing this value or revenue or profits from that is basically an optimization problem. So if you have data, a lot of variables, and an optimization problem, you should be able to have a structured solution. But it was almost like black magic. It was an art form rather than a science to go from customers to revenue and profitability. Those who mastered the art survived, and the others sort of fell back a lot in this business. So since then, it's been in my mind. My CTO used to be working with me back then too, and so we were chatting, and we had in this mind saying, okay, at some time we want to create a structured solution to this, because both of us have a background in algorithms and AI and optimization, and why can't we create a solution for this? So that's really where the sort of the aha moment came in to say, okay, fine, we can solve this problem and we should do it sometime. That's how we talked about it. Then about a year and a half later, I had a chance meeting with 4 European entrepreneurs turned investors, sort of a serial entrepreneurs who became serial investors, and sort of birds of the same feather flock together. So we started talking about business and startup and what next, and sort of the idea clicked. what was there in my mind, what sort of resonated with what they wanted to do, and we converged on this thought process to say, okay, let's look at providing a capability for businesses to optimize their customer lifetime value and using analytics. That's the way we crafted it then. And within about a year's time, we sort of pulled together the different pieces and the company was formed. That's how this company got started. A problem that was there in the industry, which was there in the back of the mind, a chance meeting with investors, things resonate, and then you start the business.
From such serendipity, businesses are born sometimes, right?
Coincidences, yeah, that's true. Serendipity,
things happen. You have a chance meeting and you had an idea in the back of your mind. They like it. The next thing here we are. I just want to make clear to our audience, the name of the company is Flytext. It's FLYTXT.
Yeah. And there's a story behind that too, very quickly, in 2 minutes. The investors whom I met, they had a company which they started in the year 2000, which was called Flytext. And they had sold that business, but they liked the name so much, so therefore they retained the name with them. Really? And then when we wanted to start a new company, we said, okay, fine, why not use the name? You guys like the name, you have retained it with you, so despite selling the business, so let's use that name.
I love it. I love it.
That was the reason. I get asked as to how did you choose the name? And this is how we chose the name.
Crazy.
A rose by any name is a rose, right?
Yeah, but it smells and sweet. So, here's the thing. Like you, I've been in business a long time, serial entrepreneur. My first business was before the .com, and then I started a hosting business in like 96 and rode that through. I sold it, went to work with the company who acquired it, and did that whole .com thing. Down through that, cybersecurity after the bubble burst, and been doing stuff ever since. One of the things in basic business models in the internet age, I've seen changes. It used to be a very direct model, retail, let's call it. I gave you a service, you paid me dollars for that service. That was my revenue. I had my cost of goods sold, my cost of sales, and it was a relatively simple equation. Here's my profitability, right? Here's my EBITDA, and so forth. In today's age where we have open source business models and there's so much, quote unquote, free software and free services that we offer, a lot of people, just like your experience, as soon as you start charging, the usage goes right down the drain, because people have an expectation that somehow this should be free, that the fruits of the fruits of your labor that you're making available to them should be free. Yet they don't deny, you're entitled to make a living, you're entitled to charge. They just don't charge them, right? Because the expectation is free for too many people on the internet today. And so we need these alternate models. How do we monetize?
That's true.
And it sounds like that's kind of where your expertise, where it all comes together here.
Yeah, that's right. So you take a typical internet business. You take a typical internet business, or you take a typical fintech business today, or even a digital content business. People want to do transactions on the fintech platforms. They want to consume the digital businesses content. As long as you are given discounts and you are given low charges and all. Once those service providers, those companies start charging you for a regular cost of business, if you want to call it that, they need to find inventive ways to be able to balance between keeping their customers and generating or maximizing the value they generate out of their customers. And what we do is we provide those companies our software using which they can do this in a structured, optimized fashion. So if we talk about a telecom operators whom we work with in large numbers, or with some fintechs or banking services, they're faced regularly with the questions as to, they have a lot of customers. So which customers can I look forward to generate more money from, or to increase their spend? Which customers are likely to leave my service? Who can I retain? Who should I retain? Because the ones I retain should be valuable for me. So essentially, continuously answering questions about how can you generate additional value from your customer base by keeping them for a longer duration with you, and for making them spend more on your products and services. That is the problem that we help enterprises to solve. So in a sense, to retain customers, to sell them more, upsell and cross-sell them more, and in that process generate higher customer lifetime value. You talked about today's businesses. A lot of businesses traditionally were working on subscriptions and usages, and with the subscription economy growing, more and more businesses are coming into that model. When you talk about a subscription business, you have an ongoing relationship with your customer, and the value or the profits that you generate from the customer is not about today or this week or this month. It's basically over a whole lifetime. And how do you maximize that? How do you optimize this? This is a complex problem. Speaking from an algorithmic perspective, which we'll appreciate, it's an intractable problem. And the only way you can solve it is to find a very good solution using some approximation technique, which is an AI techniques are commonly used to find very good solutions for such complex problems. And that's what we decided to use as our mechanism for solving these problems. And one of the things that makes us unique in this space is that when we started the business, we knew we had to develop fundamentally new technology. But we also knew that we are developing new AI, and the AI needs to be trained well on large volumes of data. So in the first 8-10 years of the business, we focused on developing the IP. We focused on working with some of the largest consumer businesses in the world, across the world. We had access to consumer insights, or insights from more than 1.5 billion customers across the world. Literally several trillion real-world data samples, which we used to, whose insights we used to train our AI. So we have one of the most well-trained AI in the customer lifetime value maximization business. And we also developed a process by which the AI learns at different customer sites, but doesn't have to bring the data to the common place, because nobody will let you bring their data to your premises. So You learn at different locations, and the learnings get combined, but not the data. So it's like that, and that's what the USP is. And that's the USP which delivers value to our customers and partners when we deliver our solutions. Sorry.
No problem. But look, what are the kinds of things you're learning, though? What are the insights that the AI or patterns or whatever you want to call it that allow you then to serve customers better monetize, create a better experience, etc.? So let me. For our viewers, let me try to give a picture that's a simpler picture of that. For instance, you talk about any enterprise. The enterprise has got a set of products and services that the customers consume over a period of time, and then over a period of time they're going to generate the value for the enterprise. So the learnings go from very basic ones as to at what time of the day does your customer like to consume what kind of service.
or what combination of products and services is this particular customer likely to consume? At what price levels would this customer like to do? So these are the kind of things that you try to infer and learn from your data and predict for the future. So broadly, I mean, if I am talking about watching Netflix movies or the equivalent of that, what genre of movies do you like in the weekends versus what genre do you like in the weekdays? Because weekends you may be sitting with your kids and you like a certain different kind of movies, and weekdays you may be watching alone or with your spouse, and then that's a different kind of movies. I mean, what movies do you like during the holiday season? I mean, to the extent Netflix doesn't use it, but you even know which parts of the movie you skip and which parts you probably rewind and watch more than once. So all this is an example of that service. Now, if you talk about a telecom, the kind of things is what kind of content do you watch on your mobile phones? Or what websites do you visit there? Do you make long distance calls in the evenings or during work hours? Do you what kind of usage patterns do you have in the weekends? And that would lead to what are you likely to spend more on and what are you likely to spend less on? And how can we give you more encouraging results? Or how can I go and rejig my product portfolio? Or how can I rejig my pricing structure for that? So it's a totality of decisions that go with customer intelligence, product intelligence, and then combining these to generate recommendations, actions, and predictions that lead to higher customer lifetime value.
Okay. I'm going to get a little business here. How does one engage with Flytex? How is this offering sold or offered to customers?
So we supply this all as a software as a service on a subscription model. So we provide the solutions directly to our customers. We also supply our technology embedded with Oracle's products as well as SAP's products. See, Oracle and SAP are two of the leading customer experience and CRM providers. And what I referred to earlier as our unique technology, so that technology is a gap, or it fills a gap in their products or the products of similar companies. And therefore, that's one channel through which we deliver the project. And our engagement model with our customers is such that we focus on ensuring that the customer derives a benefit out of it. We even introduce a success fee component into our revenue model, so that the customer as the customer gains more, we earn a part of that, or you can think of it vice versa. The customer doesn't pay us a certain part of our compensation unless they make certain level of gain out of it. So that's the model.
Yep. We mentioned Flytex, FLYTXT.com.
That's correct.
Is there a free trial or anything that people can check out?
We do offer our enterprise. This is an enterprise product. So executives from an enterprise who are interested to explore our product can come to our website and request a demo for them. They get a login to a demo service and they can experience the solution for themselves. And we also do more detailed pilots for enterprises to understand what they could benefit out of this.
Perfect.
But no, we are out of time. I tried to make sure we hit everything here that anybody out here might want to look to help us get started. You know, the whole AI in trying to help serve better is fascinating. A lot of people think it's a little snake oil yet, or it's not ready for prime time yet. Other people are saying, hey, it's getting better every day. We'd love to keep in touch with you and continue to hear how you're improving the process and how you're helping fintechs and other enterprises.
Yeah, you get me talking about AI, I can talk forever. So I will not start doing it. But
well, we filled our time up today. Not to worry. I'm sure we'll do it again. Flytext, FLYTXT.com. Check them out.
Yeah,
FLYTXT.com. Yes, .com.
Got it. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be back in a minute.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. Got our next guest lined up here for you. It's a new company, first-time guest on here. I want to introduce you to Mark Boucher. Hey, Mark, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yep. So we're going to hear about your new company and some exciting news. But before we get into that, why don't we give people a little bit of the Mark Boucher story and how you got to be here today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Unido. It's a company we started a few years back to solve a problem that I'd had, for pretty much decades. I've been in product since the first dot-com bubble, I guess the dot-com bubble in 99. And I've been in product since. And when you're in product, you have to work with every department, but you have absolutely no authority over them. And so every department ended up choosing their own tool sets, and I was the one jumping around, having to bridge the gap amongst all of them. And so it was on the bucket list of someone should solve this. And it really started as a basement project of is there a way where we could integrate all these tools together into, let's say, my tools as a product leader, and be able to interact and collaborate without having to switch around all the time. And that's how it started. Basement project to scratch that itch, launch an MVP, and we started getting some traction. And here we are today.
It's interesting. I have a good seat where I am here. I get to talk to a lot of companies, a lot of founders, new, old, and in between. I can't tell. I would say the majority of founders have started their companies because of a problem they themselves had, that they said, I got to fix this. And then once they started working on the fix, they realized, I'm not the only one with this problem, right? There's a business here. I'm going to get this fix out to other folks. And so it's a common thing.
It's easier. It's a lot easier when you're solving a problem that you've got firsthand experience. But I had a whole list of these, someone should solve this problems that I had accumulated over, joining different startups at different stages. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just having, the idea of someone should solve this. And we've been doing this for a few years now, and we still have a long way to go. So I think there's a lot more to just the idea, right? There's a lot that goes into it.
Well, no, I don't think it's just the idea. I think what happens is most people see the problem. Their first inclination is someone had to have fixed this before. Someone had this problem. Let me go see what's available to fix the problem. Then they find out, lo and behold, no one fixed the problem, but a lot of people talked about the problem. And they say, God darn it, I'm going to go fix this problem for myself. And they do. They cobble together something. They prototype something. And then all of a sudden it dawns on them this is a problem, a fix to a problem that a lot of people have. This could be a business. Now, I will tell you also, having been involved as a serial entrepreneur since the dot-coms and before, is often what happens is that problem you fixed winds up becoming just a feature of a larger platform kind of play, right?
And what's really interesting with this is because you've got this movement of it's become so easy to build and launch something, and there's so many problems, you're getting more and more and more and more software.
Absolutely.
Becomes so much more specialized, each of them on a specific problem and a specific audience. And for that audience, that product is just amazing, but it's very niche. And so you get this, it's just accelerating this proliferation of software, which is both good and a huge challenge for organizations, right?
Well, and that goes back to the underlying problem that you were trying to solve, which is, the proliferation of software. And I don't mean it in a bad way, right? Software is eating the world. Software ate the world already, I think. It's digesting it now. But the real issue is, especially when you get to larger enterprises, right? When you're working at a startup, all right, so you got a half a dozen, kind of things. You go to an enterprise that's grown both organically and via acquisition, your head explodes.
Crazy.
Right? With the amount of platforms and products and apps that you got to support.
It's a win-lose battle, because then companies get into this debate of which one do we standardize on and which one do we cut. And that's it's really a win-lose for the organization, because all the people that won't get the software that was designed specifically for them, they're losing out on productivity. They're losing out on happiness. They're often going to leave the company if they don't get the tools they want. So the premise, for Unido was, how do you make it win-win? How do you get the best of both worlds? How do you let people work in the tools that make them the happiest and most productive? But then you make those software interoperable and integrated so that everyone can, you don't pay the penalty of having silos in software and having too many softwares. So how do you resolve that problem? That's really what we set out to solve.
Okay. Yeah. You set it up. You got to kind of answer your question. I mean, is it an abstraction layer that sits on top? I mean, what is Unido?
Yeah. So Unido is an integration, like a no-code integration platform at its core. And you could compare it to the likes of a Zapier on one end, or a Workato or MuleSoft. But we took a completely different approach to integration and architected from the ground up based on two-way sync, on data synchronization between software. And that's really our claim to fame, if you want, is that out of the box, and we target business users. So out of the box, any non-technical person can connect up two tools together where they work, and when, let's say, another team is working, and we'll sync the data two-way so that it feels like everyone's in the same tool. But they're not. They're actually working in each of the different software. And so we work more in the background in that sense, and we leave people where they work. We go where people work. And that's really fundamental. The premise is deep two-way and seamless integration that a business user can set up. And we think that's the important combination for integration today. And integration is software integration is as old as software, right? And it's evolved as software has evolved over time. And we think it's due for kind of the next evolution of it. Because today it's all based on very simple automation, or if this happens here, do this there. But how do we actually make these pieces of software interoperable? How do you make them feel like they're deeply, deeply integrated? And people don't feel friction as they work with people that are in other tools.
Sure. Two things on that, Mark. One, when we look at the Zapiers and so forth of the world today, so much of it is API. Right, just API integration, right? One app talks to the other via an API app interface. Secondly, though, it's so there's integration and there's integration, right? There's simple transferring of a value, right, versus truly integrating. Can you do the true integration at scale, or is it, look, I was in cybersecurity for 25 years, right? Back in the day, ArcSight was the SIM that ruled the world, right? Hewlett-Packard bought them for like $1 billion something back then, HP. This is before we had APIs. To get your tool integrated into ArcSight was like a 1.5 year waiting period. It probably only took, 3 weeks to get done, but there was such a backlog of tools that needed to get integrated. You took a number, and we'll see in about 1.5 years. How do you do that without waiting a year and a half?
I think you're touching on something that's really important. That's why we're talking about ease of use and targeting a business user here. It's really, really important because today you either have two kind of opposite options when you look at the integration space. You're either looking at really simple, very shallow, basic automations that anybody can set up, but you can't get super far, or you're looking at much deeper technical knowledge needed. There's a central group that's managing it, and here's the queue, wait in line, right? So what we're seeing more and more, and especially in large organizations, because we are in Fortune 500 organizations, is that IT and security is shifting its role to executing those integrations and building them and maintaining them, to selecting platforms that can then let the business line users self-serve into setting up and maintaining and changing the integration as their own workflows are changing. Because setting it up is only scratching the surface in most cases. When you're setting up, you're peering to departments or an entity that you acquired or a third party that you're partnering with or hiring, and you're setting up an integration for a workflow, that's going to evolve over time. You want the agility to be able to change how you're working together. And if every time you have to go see the central person who built this and hope they're still working there, you're not going to have that agility. So the combination of allowing a deep integration and then making it really simple and encapsulating the complexity for business users set up, and then still giving the governance functionality to the IT department, that's the combination for this to scale.
Love it. All right. We didn't even get to the news we were supposed to talk about. Mark, what's the news coming out of Unito?
Well, we, in a particularly interesting fundraising environment, we closed our Series B round, but really that's a means to an end, right? So the ends is what we're talking about, is really how do we solve this problem for a larger amount of integrations and tools. And because we had a very different architecture based on sync, we specialize on certain categories of tools, and we have a smaller integration catalog, which right now we're expanding out. And that's going to really accelerate the capabilities and the reach for our platform. So solving this problem for more and more people. So that's the big news,
Yeah, no, congratulations, because as you mentioned, in challenging times, raising money, and it's a decent round, is a sign that, one of the people who I sold my company to and then helped build companies with always said, look, when you can get someone to reach into their pocket and give you a check, it's a good thing, right? You're doing something right, something to be proud of. So congratulations to you and the team there. Mark, let's talk a little for our audience out here. How do they engage with the company, with Unito? How does one get started there?
So anybody can sign up for a trial. It's directly on unito.io, and you can find us on a lot of the integration directories of the tools that we integrate. It's a pretty seamless process. It can take a couple of minutes to set up. But what's important is we also have a really solid team on the support and customer success side. And that's been really instrumental, because when you're enabling business users to solve these problems themselves, they like to know that there's someone there that have their back, just in terms of guiding them towards the best practice. And so we train our support teams to be very knowledgeable of all the tools that we integrate, so that if you're coming in and Jira inside out, but you're trying to solve a problem when collaborating with a marketing team that's living in Asana or Trello or whatnot, then we can guide you on what are the best practices for that. And we know all those tools internally. So there's a in-app chat. If you're in the trial and you have a question, just reach out and you'll have an answer.
I love it. And you mentioned unito.io. Is that it?
Yeah, unito.io.
Mark, we're out of time. I want to thank you for coming on here and telling us all about Unito and, tackling the issue of so many tools and so little time. But unfortunately, I think the problem gets worse before it gets better in terms of proliferation of software tools. But it's, as you said, it's not necessarily all a bad thing either. Anyway, best of luck. Congratulations. Come back on Techstrong and keep us posted.
Thank you, Alan. Bye.
All right, Mark, take care. We're going to take a break on Techstrong. We'll be back in a minute.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, welcome. This is the State of Pipelines, Past, Present, and Future, and this is a show brought to you by the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation, part of the Linux Foundation, and Techstrong Group. My name is Alan Schimmel. I'm the CEO of Techstrong Group and your co-host for this show, where we try to shine a light on various projects and issues and people within the Continuous Delivery Foundation community. We have two great people from that community here with me, as well as my co-host. Let me introduce you to our two panelists, though, and then we'll get to our co-host. First of all, I want to introduce you to Darren Pope. Darren, welcome.
Thanks, Alan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Darren, if you wouldn't mind, would you maybe share a little bit of your background with our audience?
Sure. My name is Darren Pope. I am a developer advocate with CloudBees, and I also do a lot of work with the Jenkins community. Based on my hair, even though it's standing up straight right now, it's a lot of gray. So I've been around before Jenkins was Hudson. So we'll get into a little bit of the history today.
Absolutely. And at least you have hair. It's not a bad thing.
I still have a little bit left.
No, you have plenty. Look, we've been there. Our next, and welcome, Darren. Our next panelist is Mark. Wait, Mark?
Welcome. Hi, Alan. Thanks. Yeah, I'm a member of the Jenkins Governing Board. I'm the Jenkins Documentation Officer, and I maintain the Jenkins Git plugin. So I'm deeply interested in Jenkins and how Jenkins works and what it does and why it does it.
Fantastic. And then last but not least is my co-host. She kind of heads up the marketing efforts at CDF and does so many other things, in addition to her full-time role at JFrog. Lori LaRusso. Lori, welcome back. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. And thank you, Darren and Mark, for joining us today. Again, this is the CD pipeline. So it's continuous delivering software from A to Z. And we are absolutely thrilled to have Jenkins, CDF's first graduated project, on the show with us today. It's a huge get for CDF. It's a huge win for the Jenkins community and the tech community in general. And I'm really excited to kind of talk about, past, present, and future of Jenkins.
Absolutely. Before we do, Lori, where in the world are you today?
Today, I am not far from home. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina at the All Things Open conference, which is really cool. So to be at an open source conference, talking to an open source project, it's kind of like a win-win.
Absolutely. I just saw Lori last week in Detroit at KubeCon, so it was good to see her in person, but she does quite the schedule. Anyway, we're going to jump into Jenkins. Let me start it off with a little of my own background. I started DevOps.com in 2013. We published March 2014 for the first time. And the second sponsor of DevOps.com was CloudBees. And back in 2013, 2014, CloudBees was pretty much all Jenkins all the time. KK, founder of CloudBees, who we mentioned Hudson, right? It was at Sun. And Darren, I'm going to assume you have a good handle on the history. I'm going to ask you to give a quick history of Jenkins. KK was there. We spent an inordinate amount of our time at DevOps when we weren't trying to define what DevOps was, because I really wanted to know what exactly was DevOps. We were talking about Jenkins and plugins and CI/CD. fast forward, it's been 8 years, something like that, and Jenkins is still probably the dominant CI/CD tool used if we look at the total commercial market. But let's spend a little time, visiting the ghost of Christmas past, so to speak, the ghost of Jenkins past. Get a little history. Darren, if you wouldn't mind, do you want to kick that off?
I will. So whether this is truth or myth, we will never know, since KK is not here to tell the story. KK, and I'm going to refer to him as KK. Mark, say his name for me correctly.
Kosuke Kawaguchi.
Thank you, because every time I butcher it. So Mark got it right. So the myth goes that KK was tired of building things by hand. So he wrote this thing that turned into Hudson. And as people were leaving Sun, he would go around and steal the machines that were setting on, and they would keep stacking up underneath his desk until finally he had a great big cluster, not to be confused with Kubernetes cluster. We'll get there in a few minutes. And that was the first real at-scale Hudson cluster at that time. And then at some point, Mark, what was that date around ballpark to where the Hudson project got renamed?
Yeah, the rename I think was around 2011. And
right.
Yeah, there was a little fallout between a certain company that purchased Sun Microsystems and the developer community that was maintaining the Hudson project, and the result was the Hudson project was renamed Jenkins, and that other company retained the license for that other name.
Right. I need, as the JD here, I've got to step in. I don't think it was truly a renaming. Wasn't it a fork?
Oh no. That's you talk to the developers and they will hard nosed tell you no, it was a rename, because the ownership of the code and the maintainer base of the code all went with the new thing. So it was truly a rename, not a fork. And it's fun to talk to people from that era about their perceptions of why it's absolutely rigorously a fork and why it's absolutely rigorously a rename. And they are very adamant, yes, not a fork. And they understand the term fork very clearly, and they know exactly what it means.
Oh, no, their
answer is no, bluntly. It is not a fork. We left.
I stand corrected, then I'll withdraw my objection. All right.
Darren, so go ahead. We go from Hudson to Jenkins in 2011, is it, right?
Right around 2011. And then from there, it was pretty much the normal things. We first started out, and back when KK started as Hudson, there was a job type called freestyle job. And that was the only job. And if you are still using freestyle jobs today, let me fast forward, don't do it. Just move on, because there's other things that we can use today. Mark, why don't you jump in on that one, because
so Mark and Darren sometimes have conflicts, and it's part of our fun of this. I have some particular uses for freestyle jobs that work quite well for me. But Darren's right. That's an 18-plus-year-old technology, that there are better ways to do it. I still remember chaining freestyle jobs together to create pipelines. And our talk today is about pipelines, right? I needed to chain things together. One thing would call another, which would call another. And what I ended up with was a rather brittle chunk of things to do the delivery. And that brittleness hurt.
Wait. Brittle? Give me a break, Mark. Come on, man. It was beyond brittle. One small thing, and that house of cards fell over.
And Darren's right, and that's why Darren's a good place for this one. Is he's absolutely right. Chaining things together like that was really, hey, it was okay 15 years ago.
It's all we had. It's all we had.
It was what we had, and it worked. But it was really not the way you wanted to do your business.
No. And then over time, eventually, Jenkins moved from the 1X line to the 2X line. I believe that was in 2016, around July 2016. And from there, that's when we had the first real chance to move from what was the only way to do pipelines. By the way, a really bad, ugly plugin to chain together the thing so you could visualize it was miserable. But then we had the concept of pipeline coming in. At first, it was scripted pipeline. If you wanted to get really ugly, Mark, the plugin name was Workflow-CPS. Makes a lot of sense, right? How do you get pipeline out of that? But then, around 6 months later, we came out with something that was named even worse, which was called the pipeline model definition, which is actually declarative pipelines. And man, that started making things a little bit better. Was it YAML? No. Thankfully, we won't get into the YAML versus JSON versus DSLs today. We could, but we won't. That's a whole nother rabbit hole that nobody needs to go down. But then we were able to declaratively define our pipelines. Scripted pipelines, Mark, it was the first.
It was, and it worked. Scripted pipelines gave me really a domain-specific language that I could use to express my pipeline. Instead of the awful, evil chain of series of jobs that I had before, I could, in code, checked into my repository, say what I wanted. And that was already dramatically better than the old thing. But
let me just cut you off here. So while you're doing all of this, how is the adoption going? Right? You guys aren't working in a bubble, right? It's not just you against the world. How is the adoption going within the community in general?
Right. So go ahead, Darren.
At that point, it was pretty horrible. Some people would take advantage of that, and they would really start building out these really stinking complex pipelines. And they were treating even the scripted pipeline. Let's not even get to declarative, because again, to begin with, all we had was scripted pipeline. And people, it's like, oh, it's just groovy. Scripted pipeline is not groovy. It looks like groovy. It smells like groovy. It is not groovy. You can take that however you want to take it.
I got to tell you, from an insider-outsider perspective, so I was there when they announced Jenkins 2.0 and they announced pipelines. And then what was the user interface too? Wasn't there a new user interface around then?
There was. The user interface, the visualization interface came out about 6 months later, called Blue Ocean. And it lets you see a visual representation of the pipeline in nodes and graphs on a pretty good-looking presentation on your screen. Yeah.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. I remember being at Jenkins World, because we were producing Jenkins World. I was with KK, seeing this saying, wow, this looks fantastic. But it never occurred to me that what people were using before then was brittle or crappy or, down. It was the dominant, it was the shits, right? I mean, let's call it what it was. It dominated the market. Everything else was peanuts. Peanuts. It probably had 90% market share. There were 1,000 plugins, or maybe more, 1,200 plugins. And maybe just because I was an outsider, I have an outsider view of it, and you guys got to see it up close with the warts. But it was a powerhouse.
Well, and to Lori's point, the question of adoption, or to her question, the question of adoption, many enterprises chose Jenkins because of its capabilities and its cost, right? They liked open source. Free is really a great price point. And they liked the capabilities, and they kept growing. But that meant they had invested heavily in these freestyle, old way of doing things. So pipeline adoption took some time. And it really did. We spent some years getting people shifted away from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things.
Well, and the key part to that is pipeline only worked on the 2x line of Jenkins, not the 1x line. And that getting people to move from 1x to 2x was actually a harder move than getting people to move from freestyle to pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that I do remember. It wasn't, they didn't do like backwards compatibility kind of thing. It was a different direction.
Right. So that took some time. So again, this was around mid-year 2016 when all of this started going into play again. Jenkins 2x came out in July 2016. The scripted pipeline, again, looks like groovy, smells like groovy. It isn't groovy. People would start writing their jobs as if it was real live code. And they would treat it like real live code, which was the exact opposite of what they should have been doing and today still should not be doing. Because what we want to do is we want to define whatever our job is, whether we're one of the examples back that year was flying a Raspberry Pi set of drone, or flying a drone. Damien did that, right, Mark? He was flying something around with Jenkins in the cloud, right? Literally, it was a Raspberry Pi flying in a drone. And, we're doing all these things and treating it like code. Okay, we're defining it as code, but that doesn't mean it has to be real code. And that's when declarative came out. But since people had already put all of their time and effort into building out scripted pipeline for the people that did that, they weren't going to rewrite it yet again to go to declarative. Again, each of these little steps along the way, there was friction being built. But then we get into 2017, and people that might have been coming to Jenkins brand new at that point, then they're able to start with declarative on the 2x line, and everything's moving forward. It's that sort of that messy middle time of coming out of 1x into scripted pipeline and then into 2x and into declarative that a lot of people just, it was hard for them to make those jumps. And of course, again, that's only 6 years ago. So you think about it, then 12 years before that. So again, Jenkins has been around quite a long time.
Yep.
And people are still making changes today. So
because it's an open source project, and because you were making like leaps and bounds and changes and friction points, how did the community handle that? Because it's open source. So how are things working within the community? Like, you're on the Mark, it wasn't the TOC. I forget what you said, that you're on the board.
I'm on the board, right?
Right. So you have to hear a lot of the feedback from the community. So as you're really trying to move things forward, what were you dealing with back then?
Well, so one of the compelling principles that Kosuke started with was compatibility, and deep and serious compatibility, sometimes even if it meant to the detriment of new functionality. And so his commitment to compatibility, and it was really KK that started it, and it just continued. That commitment to compatibility meant that we would carry forward what they had done before, and it would keep working. And it was important, crucial, vital that it keep working. However, things like pipeline, that really is a new thing, right? And it's not compatible because there wasn't a thing before. And so those transition points are interestingly complicated, right? For an enterprise, as they think about, how do I make this switch from what I was doing and it works for me now to a better way to do things? Yeah. Did that answer your question, Lori?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, it's hard to take the leap, first of all, and JFrog, I'm sorry, we use leap terms all the time. But then when if you're focused on compatibility and it's something that's never been done before, how are you supposed to adopt that as an end user? How are you supposed to tell your CTO that this is the way that we should do things when there's literally it's just a proof of concept? You're like, it should work. I know we've invested heavily in this infrastructure, but they're telling me it's going to work. It looks like it's going to work. It's working over here. I mean, I think that's what's really cool about having a project that's been around for 18 years is that you do have those long tail use case stories and can really see how not just Jenkins evolved, but how it evolved for companies and how they evolved with it to make them, better, stronger, faster, all of the good things. And now we're all cloud native, moving from, different clouds, not just on-prem to cloud, but cloud, different clouds all the time. It's just fascinating to be able to have the history with one project. And, again, you were part of the CDF, so that's huge for us,
Mm-hmm. You know what? If I could weigh in here, again, maybe as an outsider rather than an insider, I think one of the strengths of Jenkins and one of the reasons why here we are 18 years later and it's still what it is out there is, and it started with KK because I saw it up close and personal with him, but it carried through to just about everyone at CloudBees. And that was the sense that Jenkins needed an independent community. That's why it's a perfect fit for the CDF. That it wasn't going to be owned lock, stock, and barrel and managed solely for the betterment of, let's say, CloudBees, right? Sasha Labere and the whole CloudBees team actually did a really good job of setting up sort of a Chinese wall, if you will, right, between the Jenkins community versus CloudBees, right? Not to say that there weren't CloudBees people, on the Jenkins board and so forth, but it functioned independently, and it allowed, Lori, to your point, users in the market, in the community, to have a say in what was going to be in the official release and what wasn't, right? And so I think, fast forward to today, right? Jenkins was passed over to or given to the CDF to manage, and it's certainly more independent than it ever was of any one vendor, and that that's the beauty of this whole model, is it works for that. We mentioned cloud native though, and Darren, you used the K word earlier. For many people, Kubernetes.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. Could we pause there for just a second before we go down this path?
Okay, I'm going to hit pause.
So, Lori, I'm going to take. I don't know the right word for this. I disagree with you on this. Not everybody is cloud native. People are moving there, but it still is not there. We are in the infancy of getting into cloud native. I think it's still going to be 10 years before we can actually say 50+% we are cloud native. Different conversation, but I had to get that out there because I had to disagree with you on that point. Sorry.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think that's kind of what we need to hear, right? And I think, Mark, you had something that you wanted to talk about in terms of here we are, I'm jumping into the future, right? To your point, Darren. But Mark, there was things that you wanted to say about Jenkins in the, I don't want to say the past, but certain things that you wanted to touch on that people might not realize are still good practices, or they're just getting started with Jenkins. And I know we haven't finished the history yet, but I wasn't sure if this was a good opportunity to kind of bring that part up as well.
Well, Alan, I think led us towards that direction. Kubernetes is an expression of containerization, right? It's something containerization plus orchestration, right? And before we got Kubernetes, we had Docker and the folks there who did containerization with just pure containerization. And that transition, that going from virtual machines towards containerization was and continues to be an interesting and useful transition for many people. If they haven't containerized yet, it's worth them thinking, what would I do to containerize this thing? How could it help me, and what would it do? All right, after containerization, then it may be time to say, okay, what can I do with the orchestration of those containers? And Kubernetes is an interesting choice as a container orchestrator. There are even other container orchestration schemes, cloud providers who are doing container orchestration without requiring that I do Kubernetes. So all of them are interesting parts of this whole continuous integration, continuous delivery journey.
So, Darren.
Yes.
Answered Lori. I think, on our history timeline here, I feel like we're on a Saturday morning cartoon, conjunction junction. Anyway.
What's your function? Yes, I remember
exactly.
that.
We're both that old. Lori has no idea what we're talking about.
I know what you're talking about. Okay. I appreciate you, though.
So, version 2.0 of Jenkins out. It's kind of a game-changing version with pipelines and Blue Ocean and all of these things. And we're starting to see containerization, and people are saying, wait a second here. Jenkins has all of these plugins. Everything works with Jenkins, including JFrog, including so many other DevOps kind of staples that we've come to know. But this isn't going to work in a container world, in a container environment. And I don't know the current status of, let's say, Jenkins X, and I thought that was merged in. Has it not been merged in? Are we allowed to talk about it on this show?
We can certainly talk about it. It's a CDF project.
Mm-hmm.
So Jenkins X has not been merged, and Jenkins X continues as a separate CDF project. They're actually right now talking about a possible rename so that they get clarity in terms of where their direction is going and where the Jenkins project is going. Lori, you may have more information on that, but my hints are that right now Jenkins and Jenkins X are two separate entities, and they'll continue evolving as separate entities.
And that's exactly right. And it's not to say that they don't work together in certain instances. And I think all of the, that's one of the things that we at the CD Summit that we had at KubeCon we're talking about was that, just because it's one project doesn't mean it doesn't use another open source project to support it. But Jenkins X is going through a rename. They haven't decided yet, but they are going to continue to be two separate projects. Jenkins has graduated. Jenkins X is just getting renamed and really working towards that full-on adoption and moving forward to be a sustainable project.
Excellent. Okay, so I guess this brings us up to maybe 2018, in that time frame. Maybe it's 2019. I think the CDF, when was the CDF originally charted? Was it 2019, Lori, or do you remember?
I think so. Why do you ask me questions, Alan, that I just blank on? This is
so,
twice
I
you've done
don't
this
know,
to
but
me.
I was there. I'll be honest with you. I was there when they did it.
Jenkins, I think, might have been one of the first projects that was donated to CDF. Tracy Miranda was the first, from Cloudbees, was the first CDF ED and manager. And that really, to me, that truly made Jenkins really independent. It was even though Cloudbees was a benign benefactor, manager, whatever you want to call it. KK left Cloudbees. He's doing his own thing at Launchable. Jenkins is now part of the CDF. It's got its own, emancipation, if you will, proclamation. And let's go from there. Darren, if you want to continue the role as historian with Mark adding color, what went on from there?
So as Jenkins moved out of software in the public interest, Mark, I believe that's the correct way, SPI, moved into CDF, then it's been there and growing throughout this time since that 18-19 era, now up to 2022. We've lost 3 years, right? So it's 2022 now, just in case you were still thinking it was 2020. And from there, we've learned things along the way. Yes, we have all of these plugins, but one of the things that's been really realized is you don't necessarily need all the plugins. And this is how, if you're wanting to have a really good, stable Jenkins controller running all the time, oh, by the way, naming changed all through that time. We moved from master to controller. We moved from slave to agent. There were a few other renames that were added in during this time. And as we've seen people using it, it's like, okay, well, really, when you're creating new jobs, we'll just call them jobs right now inside of Jenkins, you really want to do it this way, and maybe, lay off some of the plugins. Because as things get upgraded, if you think about it, when you add a plugin to a Jenkins controller, now you've added one more dependency. And as you keep adding dependencies and you have to keep these versions all together, that Cartesian can get to be pretty bad really fast. So if you can minimize plugins when you're going through and trying to upgrade, then usually that's a lot easier jump to make. Mark? What do you think about that? Because you maintain one of the not core plugins, but one of the most used plugins anywhere in the Jenkins ecosystem.
Agreed. And I think what's happened is, as part of this shift, as people think about how they do continuous integration, continuous delivery, they're shifting away towards a glue and component model, where they use Jenkins as glue, and the components are stuff they maintain themselves. And so they've simplified their lives by making that choice. It's easier to develop, easier to deploy, by using that. What effectively they're doing is use Jenkins less and use their own code more.
Let me add in one thing here. I'm going to give Lori some props, at least JFrog. So Lori, since you're here.
I'll take it.
Recently, there was a new JFrog plugin released. There was an old school Artifactory plugin. There was just Artifactory. And it wasn't maintained, as best as I can tell, by anybody within JFrog. But this new JFrog plugin is being maintained by JFrog. First rule of thumb. If somebody produces a plugin and they're not part of a company X, whatever the company that plugin's for, don't run far away, but start walking away. Versus now I see that we got 4 committers from JFrog maintaining the JFrog plugin. But then I started digging into this plugin. And it's basically a lightweight wrapper around the JFrog CLI. By the way, again, I'm going to give JFrog some love here. That JFrog CLI is the bomb. I have been recommending it for when I was working within professional services within CloudBees. I would say, look, you're using Artifactory, use the JFrog CLI. If you're not using Maven or Gradle or something that has it all built in, sort of handle it nicely. That's perfect. But then I'm going to start moving a little bit ahead here. Then all of a sudden, JFrog comes out of the blue and releases this. I'm going to try it. Persia. Did I say it right? Did I get even close?
Yeah, you did. You got it.
Yes,
you got it.
Persia, yes.
Another
Good.
CDF project.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's the key part here. Lori was talking about having the CDF projects working with each other. Now, that was just announced at the time we were recording this last week. Last week? Lori, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. So that's a key thing, because as we're starting to get into this proof, I don't want to use the word blockchain. I just can't. I can't use the word blockchain, but I'm going to use it in a rough way. We have this quorum or consensus, if I remember reading right. So we'd have three builds that are proving it. Yep, this is good, and then it's inside of Persia. That's going to be key as we're moving forward in supply chain. Everybody's tired of hearing about supply chain already. Guess what? It's going to be the number one thing for, this is my prediction, for the next 10 years. Because until that's solved, nothing else matters.
Darren, I think you were reading my mind, because that was where I kind of wanted to take the conversation to is the present, because again, supply chain security shifting left, that's the present. That's where we're at. What are we doing? How do we figure this out? What does this problem solve? So what is Jenkins doing to help, secure their pipelines, to secure your product, to secure, the supply chain moving forward? What are you currently working on to help solve the problem?
Yeah, so for us, Darren, you okay if I take it
Yes,
for a minute?
please do.
All right, so we've got a crucial part of our delivery process is how do we deliver new releases of Jenkins and new releases of the plugins inside Jenkins to the community. And we've steadily moved from the developer releases their own to a continuous delivery model where machinery does the release, ships the plugin, and all the developer did was commit a change to the master branch, to the primary branch on their GitHub repository. That continuous delivery technique means, the delivery machinery is now all inside a nice, safe space that the infrastructure team maintains, rather than worrying about what's on a particular developer's environment when they do a delivery. So continuous delivery for us is a big deal, and it matters in terms of helping supply chain security.
Well, and with security, the Jenkins security team, every developer can opt in their repositories into the security process. And that's, the security people are very strange. I'm sorry, and if they watch this, but they have to be. There has to be a walled garden correctly put around them, because it's a big deal. So I don't have a whole lot of details because they don't publish a lot of details. Sort of on purpose, right? That's how you want your security people to be. You just want to slide pizzas underneath the door to them.
All right. Hey, I'm in security for 25 years. I got to stand up for my peeps.
Yeah, it's
First of all,
fine.
we only eat pizza in the dark, but it's not necessarily behind closed doors. You don't have to slide it under. Just leave it on the cube or something. We'll come by and get it. But
But I
you're
like
right.
what you're saying, how it makes security easy for developers, right? Because I think, Alan, I don't know if it was one of your shows that I was watching where, or if it was a talk at the CD Summit, but there was someone that was saying, leave security to security professionals and get it out of the hands of developers, which is exactly kind of like an opposite. What we've been hearing, which is like give developers more opportunities to help secure their code at source. So what you're saying is Jenkins kind of takes the best of both worlds, right? You have your guys that are getting the pizza under the door, and then the developer that can just, commit their code and know that they're safe because of all that you're doing in the background.
Or they will find out that they weren't safe automatically because of that, which is fine.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's part of an evolutionary thing that we see that, all right, we started all those years ago, we were proud to compile our code. We were really proud that it compiled. That C compiler actually worked and it made it all the way. And we got really bold. We started writing automated tests for it. And those automated tests, we were so proud that they worked too. That was so great. And guess what? It's gotten better from there because now we do static analysis. We do detailed looks to see inside the code. Are there known security vulnerability patterns here? We do dependency scanning. We do all sorts of additional checks now, and the checks just keep getting better to help us at every part of the whole delivery chain.
Absolutely. You know, to the point on letting security people do security, I think what we're seeing is, you know, there's always been this friction on DevSecOps and shift left, and a lot of folks in the security world and quite frankly in the SRE world are saying, hey, we're doing shift left at the expense of shift right, and you got to kind of balance that, right? You can't throw it all on the developer, right? You still need to do your security after release. The world doesn't end at the point of delivery, right? And that's sound DevOps principles, right? Feedback loops, iterate. So, you know, to my security folks out there, no, we're not taking your jobs away, and you know, you got to be. I have to go to RSA in a couple months. You want me to get killed out there? We got to go easy, guys. But anyway, yes, Jenkins has helped a ton with this, right? So, guys, we only have a few minutes left. I want you to take your crystal balls out a little bit, and let's talk about, where do you see Jenkins going? What can Jenkins do? How does it maintain its kind of preeminent position, if you will? Right? What does it need to do? What should it do? What will it do? Darren, I've been letting you lead off. I'm going to go to Mark first on this one, if it's okay.
So we've talked about integration in other forms. I think the next step for us is event-based integration, where we use, whereas previously, you remember the story told earlier, I chained jobs together explicitly. This job knew to call this job, and knew to call this job, and knew to call this job. The better way to do it, and the way that's evolving now, is I define a series of events, things that listen to those events and things that respond to those events. And thankfully, we've got a first iteration of it, the CD event specification, that was just released, a week or so ago, Lori, if I remember correctly. And so event-based integration is where things are headed because it decouples the integration. So that's one. That's one for me. Then I propose let's give Darren a chance to talk to others that he sees.
Well, I think one, we've already sort of mentioned it, it's going to be getting more and more, and that's supply chain. Again, I said that's going to be the number one thing for the next 10 years. DevOps has been the thing for the past 10 years. The next 10 years is going to be supply chain. Because most tools, whether it's Jenkins, whether it's, I'll name off some others, GitHub Actions, you name it, it's there. That part is almost commoditized. But what's not commoditized is the supply chain. And that has got to be solved. As at the time we're recording, there has been a new OpenSSL thing announced, or is going to be announced. That's a big one. So how do we keep this as automated as possible? So again, when a developer puts in their code, there's as much testing, not just for testing's sake, but for, hey, we see this pattern. That's a bad thing to do. So that way we're not having these days that happened where everybody's on pins and needles of, okay, am I going to lose the rest of my week dealing with remediation of this? And Mark, I think there was one other thing that was important.
One more argument for me was, I think the other piece that will be probably a never-ending quest is to accelerate what we're doing. There are so many things that I want to go faster. You pick whichever they are. I want my tests to run faster. I want my deployments to run faster. I want my security checks to run faster. And there are lots of challenges hiding in each of those opportunities to accelerate.
Excellent. Guys, we're out of time. Mark, Darren, thank you so much for joining us on CD Pipelines. This won't be the last show where we focus on Jenkins and other elements, so I'm sure we'll have you back on again once we cycle through the other projects, and we start kind of combining them. But you know what? So many people on so many open source projects, quite frankly, do yeoman's work like the two of you that allow these projects to support the vast communities they do. And a lot of times they don't get acknowledged. Most times they don't get acknowledged for it. So on behalf of the whole community, let me thank you both for all the work you guys do, as well as the rest of the Jenkins team, right? It's not easy. So thank you for that. Lori, I'm going to give you the last word.
Oh man, it's tough. So yes, Mark and Darren, thank you so much for being here today. Alan, thank you for again letting the CDF have the CD pipelines as an avenue for us to push out what's happening in the continuous delivery ecosphere out to the world. We appreciate everyone being here. We hope that you tune into our next show. So thank you to all of the projects in the CDF, specifically Jenkins, our first graduated project. I think we just had a really good history lesson and see our way into the future. And so happy to have Jenkins kind of spearheading the way for us, moving everything forward. So thank you so much. And we're so, just thanks for having us.
Lori, real quick, web address for CDF.
So go to cd.foundation and you will be able to see all of the current projects that we have, as well as how you can get involved. You can join our Slack channel. You can join our mailing list. You can find out how to get more involved in Jenkins, become a contributor. Mark does documentation. I'm sure there's always room for someone that needs additional doc work and not just in coding. So there's always opportunities for you to work on an open source project. And that's another thing that we really just want to push out there is don't be afraid to try. There's plenty of opportunity for you, regardless of what your skill set is.
Thank you. All right. We'll see you next month on the next edition of CD Pipelines. Have a great day, everyone. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound is a bi-weekly, or is it semi-weekly? I always forget, Mitchell. But it's every other week show on various topics in DevOps. And we've been doing this now. Geez, I think we're over 2 years, Mitchell, on DevOps Unbound. And it's one of my favorite things every other week to do. But really my favorite thing is maybe once a month or every 6 weeks, we do a live version of this with a live audience, and the audience drives the questions and the topics. So if you're watching this, recorded, thank you. But you really want to check out the schedule and join us on our next live one as well. I should also mention that DevOps Unbound is sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis, the leaders in continuous testing worldwide. They're a great sponsor to work with. I've said it in the past on other shows. And they've been with us since day one here on DevOps Unbound. So many thanks to the good folks at Tricentis. Let me introduce you to our panel today, and then we'll jump into what our topic is. Starting from the top of my screen is the one and only Mike Rothman, who happens to be the GM of Techstrong Research Business Unit, as well as Chief Strategy Officer here at Techstrong. Hey, Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Always great to be here. And again, I'm not sure if I've been on DevOps Unbound before. In any case, I'm excited to be here for sure.
We're excited to have you, man. We're excited to have you at Techstrong. We're also excited to have you here on DevOps Unbound. Next up, I want to introduce you to Jonathan Boswell. Jonathan, you've been here before. Welcome.
I have. Thank you very much.
A little background, maybe?
Oh, sure. I'm a product marketing director at Tricentis. I've been about 4 years. Previous to that, SAP and a bunch of other big tech companies. Been about 25 years in the business, seen all kinds of things, and looking forward to seeing what crazy things happen next.
Absolutely. Next is, well, she needs no introduction if you've watched any of our Techstrong TV shows over the years. She's the host of Techstrong Women. She's a frequent contributor to our panel shows. She's also very involved. Well, I'm going to let her talk about her involvements. Tracy Reagan. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. It's always fun to be on these panels. I actually love doing it. And I agree. I love the live ones too. I love the chats. Yes, I've been doing this kind of work for some time. Full disclosure, I am the CEO of Deploy Hub. I'm on the board of the Open Source Security Foundation, as well as Technology Advisory Council for the CD Foundation. I have done many migrations in my career, but I haven't had the pleasure of suffering through a full-on cloud migration for an enterprise, even though we've done on-prem to cloud migrations in Deploy Hub. So this is an interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We're going to get in there in a second, but I do want to introduce our last panel member, and I always save him for last. He's my co-host. He's been doing this with me since day one, and he's our CTO as well as the principal research analyst at the Techstrong Research Group, Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitchell.
Good to be here. I'm wearing my jacket in honor of our first day snow on the ground here in Colorado, so it's not 85 degrees like Boca where I was earlier this week. So, hey, I was just going to throw in, I have done actually a pretty large cloud migration. It wasn't for an enterprise, it was for a SaaS that did 92 million transactions a year, going from our own colo into AWS. So it was interesting, let me tell you that. So, and fun, sort of, if you like.
Let me just say that my big migration was from New York down here to Boca about 20 years ago, and it is 85 degrees. But, we've kind of let the cat out of the bag here on migrations, and that is the topic of today's show, right? The title is Testing Strategies for Cloud Migration Success. And before we could get into testing regarding cloud migrations, I think we got to talk about cloud migration and define that. There was a time, Mike's old partner at Securosis, our friend Rich Mogul, we used to call him the redhead, but there's not as much hair there as there used to be. Who am I to talk? But anyway, right, formerly, but who am I to talk? Anyway, Rich kind of, for me anyway, coined the term of cloud washing, right? Cloud washing. And it was kind of like this shift and lift kind of thing where you just took what you were doing on-prem and voila, I installed it in on top of the hypervisor in AWS. Now I'm all about cloud. But that, we quickly found out that's kind of a failed strategy. That lift and shift doesn't work. That cloud washing doesn't work. Some people used to say, well, that's not cloud native, but now cloud native is a whole separate thing. But in any event, right, there a best practices. I don't know if it's more science than art yet, but a best practices has evolved around cloud migrations. Now, it's gotten more complicated as we've had multi-cloud and hybrid clouds and all of these things and different kinds of clouds. But nevertheless, there's a little bit of, there's more than a little bit of science and more than a little bit of art to successful cloud migrations. Mitchell, you mentioned you were involved in one. Jonathan, I'm wondering your involvement in any? I mean, SAP, right?
Yeah, SAP definitely. And with Tricentis, what we do is we help people making their cloud migrations. There's a big, a lot of customers are moving, say, from ECC to S/4HANA on the cloud, or moving, adopting Oracle Cloud as well, moving their EBS to the Oracle Cloud as well. So we see a lot of that. We've helped a lot of customers with their cloud migrations. And there are some patterns that emerge, some challenges that are common that we can get into, and some solutions also that work as well.
Absolutely. Mitch, if you had to say one lesson you learned during your cloud migration with this SaaS product, what would you say was the biggest lesson, the biggest aha?
I'd say planning. It took a lot of preparation to do it, and planning included a lot of early testing, kind of solving the engineering questions like, how is this going to work? And can we do a A/B transaction flow? How would our database sync work? Do we just push it all up? Do we do what, do the Office 365 migration where first time we did it, everybody was down for a day and a half? Or do we make it work? But that was, unfortunately, some other people helped us do the planning. Some people that had gone through it before. We didn't try it on our own. I think that was probably the second, maybe the first best advice was don't go it alone.
Yeah, I want to clarify a couple things, Alan, right? One is you kind of intimated that lift and shift doesn't work. That's not exactly right? So lift and shift works, it just doesn't work very well, right? So you're sub-optimizing, it's costing you way too much money. You're not, kind of, again, leveraging a lot of the capabilities that you have on a cloud platform. So, and I don't want to mislead anybody to say that you can't do that, because some folks lose their data site or their colo goes down or for whatever financial reasons, and they have to lift and shift. They can do it. It's just suboptimal, right? And the thing to piggyback on what Mitch had said about planning, it's really about getting small, right, in order to get big. So you really have to think about it one workload at a time. Right? What am I trying to migrate? Yes, you want to, to Jonathan's point, you want to have design patterns. You want to have, kind of structures. You want to have a set of services that you can, use as you're refactoring some applications. But this idea that you're going to do, 200 applications in the next 6 months, maybe you'll get there, but you got to start with one. Right. And then you do 2, and then you get to half a dozen. And then by the time you have a dozen, you've got 3 or 4 different design patterns for what those things look like, different processes for how you get there. And then you can start stamping them out because you've built the tool chain, you understand the migration process, and then you can really start, kind of moving much more aggressively. But the first one's going to be brutal. I mean, absolutely brutal. And to Mitch's point, if you're not doing a lot of planning and you don't understand what cloud native services you're going to use, and you don't, and you're not really engaging nowadays with service providers that specialize in this migration, you're really sub-optimizing, because the reality is you're not the first moving into the cloud. So to not take advantage of people that have done a lot of this already is, bordering on malpractice, candidly.
I think everybody wants to take eat an elephant one bite at a time. But some companies can't. Some companies have to do with that big lift and shift. It really depends on how interconnected your applications are. So getting a plan together obviously is the first part of that strategy. And in my experience, some of the mistakes is not having everybody with skin in the game. If you have to do a massive migration like that, and a lot of companies just do, just because of the way their software talks to each other, especially the financial industry, they have so many pieces that have to work together. They can't just take one application at a time. They have to take a few dozen at the same time. You have to get the team really set up. You have to have the developers acknowledging that this is happening. You have to have your DevOps teams ready for it. You have to have your QA, your database, your DBAs. Don't forget about that. And your end users. You need to have a group of end users that you are going to rely on to say, you're going to be first. We're going to roll you guys out first when we do this massive shift. So each of those organizations have to have their own strategy. You have to break it out so that each one of those organizations understand what they have to do. Developers understand they have to be on call. They're not going to do a new release for a few weeks. DBAs have to have a strategy.
That was a very devious laugh, Tracy. Okay.
I know. It's like, we can sneak this in right before the last minute.
I'll get your little dog, too. Okay.
Exactly. And the DBAs, the schemas and the data is probably the most critical part. And tooling around that, a lot of companies, I think that they can do this with just manual intervention, but don't worry, spend the money on the tooling, even if it's just used for this one migration. Use it, especially around data schemas and the data and how to track and compare, do your metrics, get your metrics together and compare that. You don't have to do this much work if you're doing it one bite at a time, but if you do have to do that lift and shift, you really have to spend the time to build out strategies for each team and really start thinking about the metrics and get your DBAs involved in a big time serious way.
Sounds like lessons learned from mini migrations, cloud or not, right, Tracy?
Yes.
Someone said to me in the process, at the beginning of the process, said, "But just a cultural reference. You remember in the Blues Brothers, Jake and Elwood driving the Crown Vic police cruiser? They said, if you're starting with a Crown Vic today, you'll have a Crown Vic in the cloud too. Just remember, it's still a Crown Vic when you get there. So it's not like it's magic and all of a sudden everything's good and golden and rosy. It's still the app that you had before. So I think one of the things to think about is, what is the compelling event that is causing you to go to the cloud? Why are you doing it? In my case, it was, we need to do a hardware refresh in 12 to 16 months. And I was budgeting for that. Like, okay, are we going to have the money to do this? Or do we want that cash for something else and go to a services kind of payment model? And that was our motivation. So it required getting everything up there. So we had to kind of move the Crown Vic and then start working on it in the cloud and do that preparation. But it behaved very differently in the cloud than it did in our own offsite data center. I mean, these are servers and data store stuff we didn't control and didn't know what to expect. So we had to really do a lot of testing up front.
Yeah, Mitch, I want to take a little bit of an issue with that Crown Vic, because what a lot of our customers are doing is, if you're looking at ERP modernization, for example, you're taking your old Crown Vic that you've been tinkering and working on for probably the last 20 years. And essentially, when you're moving to the cloud, if you're moving to S/4HANA, you're trading it in. You're buying a whole new car, a McLaren or whatever it is, whatever the example you want to use. And so it's not the same old workloads just in the cloud. You're actually doing a lot of redesign potentially of your business processes and everything. To take advantage, as we were talking about earlier, of the advantage of the cloud. You don't want to just do that lift and shift. You don't want to put your Crown Vic in the cloud. You want to, get in there and in some cases have a whole new, if not greenfield, something close to it, a whole new implementation in the cloud, whole new business way of doing business in the cloud. And that brings me back to the planning phase, because you can talk about what's required to technically move your workloads to the cloud, but from the business planning point of view, what are all these customizations that we've made to our SAP systems anymore? Are those now, a lot of them actually are going to be now standard in S/4HANA, for example. So you don't want to bring that code over. You have to do a lot of planning in order to figure out what business is going to look like in this cloud. How am I going to drive the new car, when I'm used to driving the Crown Vic?
Yeah, that's what I did wrong. Okay.
Going back to that planning phase.
Well, it's because you try to live your life like Jake and Elwood. That's the problem.
It's dark.
The penguin sentence.
Speaking of cars, though.
God.
Yeah. Speaking, that's pretty funny. This is going south, guys. I got to grab hold of this. Speaking of cars, though, I remember being at an IBM Think, or whatever it was before it was called Think conference, probably in Las Vegas, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And they had I think it was the CIO of Hertz, who at the time had just opened up a huge facility data center on the west coast of Florida, near Bonita Springs, somewhere right, Estero, something like that. It's near Naples and Bonita Springs. And they made a decision to move to the cloud. It was the most radical cloud migration I ever saw. They migrated nothing. They just built greenfield new applications in the cloud. And as soon as they were up, they just shut the on-prem ones off. That CIO got fired.
Within the year.
I'm sure that went smoothly.
No kidding. He got fired within the year.
But I always admired his gumption, or I don't want to use another word. You want to talk about running head. Will Palmer. I'm going to show my age. Will Palmer from F Troop, right? Running right head along into the charge here. I mean, you want to talk about cloud, look, he didn't worry about testing. He didn't worry about what was migrating. He just, turned one off to the other. So there is, to your point about lift and shift being suboptimal, there are other suboptimal kind of things. But, here's the fact. For a long time, the word on the street, or the real word was, there's stuff running in the cloud. How much of it's mission critical? How much did companies like SAP, how much did large enterprises really migrate to the cloud that they couldn't afford to go down, right? And maybe this is the reason why they didn't, right? Migrating to the cloud was, about managing risk. And that's a true statement. Have we overcome that now? Have best practice? We went through this in DevOps, right? I'm one of the founders of DevOps Institute. Tracy's worked with them. We went through a period in DevOps Institute where we didn't want to use the word best practices. We called them evolving practices because there really wasn't best practices yet. Have we gotten to a... Yeah, because they weren't fully evolved. Have we gotten to best practices in cloud migration? And if so, what role does testing play in it?
I think we have. I think there are a good set of evolving practices. For example, in some of the early migrations, some of the folks that I would talk to as they suffered through this, one of their bigger problems was doing a proper application security audit. Because what happens is when you do these migrations, you like to turn off a lot of security because it sure makes it a lot easier to get through it. But then you forget to turn back on that security at the application level, at many of these different levels. And I believe that we've learned the lesson, and there's a better understanding that that application security audit really has to happen before you can really turn off the other on-premise. So I believe that there has been, and like I was talking about earlier, the schema and the data. I think there's some really evolving practices around how to migrate and move the schemas over. There's tooling for it. And we've gotten better at doing the metrics testing. The better we have testing on the on-prem, we can shift that over to the cloud and we can do those comparisons. So I think that the practice, we have evolved, and there are really clear standard practices that companies understand they have to go through.
Yeah.
Overall, from a conceptual point of view, not thinking of testing as the last thing you do, but think of it as one of the first things you need to plan for. A colleague of mine likes to talk about cloud migrations as equivalent to skydiving. You don't want to wait till you're midair to make sure your parachute's going to work, right? You want to make sure that you've planned for it, that you understand what's going to go on. And what we're actually encouraging people to do and building this into the essential or best practices for SAP and Oracle, these big ERP migrations, is to make sure that you're testing, you're including testing, you're planning for testing in those earliest planning stages. Otherwise, if you wait to think about how we're going to test this, you're going to run into delays, you're going to run into overruns, and you may fail, like splat at the end, and nobody wants that. But again, the real critical thing is to think about how you're going to be testing, what needs to be tested, what's going to be different about your testing. As Tracy was saying, you do your baseline for performance on your on-prem to make sure that you're not getting worse. There's all these things you need to start thinking about earlier in the planning stages than maybe you're used to in a typical release, where you wait and you do testing at the end. It's pretty much flipped when you're talking about these cloud migration.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to factor in is that you have a lot of different components that you're thinking about, especially as you move to the cloud. Some of them will be native services from your cloud provider. Some of them will be third-party services that you integrate in that you'd access via APIs. And all of those linkages and integration points need to be exercised. right? Not just from a functionality standpoint, right? But also from a scalability standpoint, because one of the advantages of refactoring, one of the, kind of ideas behind auto scaling and, kind of orchestrating and automating, all of these things is that we can have the infrastructure that our application needs at the scale that it needs at the time that it needs it, right? And that means we've got to test all those different scenarios. So it's not just a, hey, is it up? Hey, when we throw a boatload of traffic at it, does it keel over? It's how does it scale up? How does it contract? How does it integrate all these other services in there? How do I make sure that I've got visibility across the entire environment? One of the things Mitch has been very patient in schooling me, right? I'm an old SIM guy from the security world, and he's using terms like tracing, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Right. And he's like, no, it's like, you got all these microservices, you got to trace how they're working together. And, I'm like, dude, you're like talking a different language to me right now. It's like, doesn't it all go into one database and all that? But you have to actually have that instrumentation as you're moving these workloads into the cloud, or you're dead meat, right? So that's just the testing side of it. The other thing I want to add is the importance of taking a programmatic approach to this. It's not the first one you're going to do, right? Your typical, even medium-sized enterprise has hundreds of applications that they're going to want to re-platform at some point. This thing has to be, if you're not thinking about it as an ongoing thing that you're going to do not once, not twice, but 100 times, right? And what are the things that I need to put in place to ensure that the 100th time basically works by itself? You're doing it wrong, right? Because this is going to be an ongoing thing that you have to deal with at all times.
Yeah, just to add on to that, not only are the migrations going to be adding on, but once you're in the cloud, the updates are going to be ongoing. One of the big challenges for enterprises with these legacy ERP systems is that if you're on-prem, you can choose when you want to update. You can choose how you update. On the cloud, now you're on someone else's time schedule. It's typically quarterly. Oracle, SAP, all your big ERP providers are providing, at least it's quarterly. So you got to have your testing processes in place to be able to keep up with that accelerated pace, right? So to get back to what you're saying, learning these best practices now, transforming your testing capabilities to be able to keep up with this pace will not only help you in your first migration through your 100th migration, but all the work that comes afterwards to keep those things up to date.
I want to highlight something that I'm sorry, Alan, but I want to highlight something that Jonathan said earlier. He said, watch for what testing is different. I think that's a little tidbit he snuck in there that's super critical. And the two areas that you should be looking at where your testing is different is your load and your pen testing. When you shift to the cloud, your load testing and your pen testing are going to be very different from what it looked like on-prem. Just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tracy. I think you're 100% right. I think there are others, obviously. The idea with cloud infrastructure as a service is you're relying on the cloud provider for their infrastructure, right? So you're not, you may not be as worried about sort of infrastructure tests, though you want to make sure you have capacity, but that's the nature of cloud. But here's what I think. What I'm hearing, though, today, folks, and that is, look, this is a hard enough problem to get your head around. But we've made a lot of progress. Now we start adding in things, though, like multi-cloud, hybrid. I'm not lifting the whole app. I'm just putting my database up there. And let me throw another one. We mentioned a little bit. Let's go to a microservices architecture while we're at it. What the heck? Right? My head's going to explode. What? I'm sorry.
Don't do that at the same time.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
That guy up in Naples
develop
did
and
that.
don't do microservices. No, but that's the real world, right? These are real world things that we deal with, and it's hard.
I'm a fan of microservices. I'm just saying don't do that at the same time.
Yeah.
If you have, put everything in a container, your monolithics in a container, get it all working, and then think about decoupling and think about a, domain strategy. But the other thing is, especially when you're thinking about these hybrid environments, everybody still has the mainframe. most organizations we talk to still do stuff on the mainframe, so that's always going to be there, and it's going to be connected to your new cloud environment. Have fun with it. Nobody's going to just put all this out in production day one. This is going to be something that's initially built in a big giant test environment. So have game days. Have game days. Break things. Don't be afraid of breaking things, because the more you practice, the more confident your teams will be. We talked about confidence. I'm going to plug Techstrong Women. We just did a interview with Nora Jones from Jelly, and she's into chaos engineering. She talked about how chaos engineering, there was an adoption problem because of the confidence level. You don't want to break things if you don't know if you can fix it. If you can get your team super confident in your test environment and have some game days, then when you go to do your production migration, everybody's going to be much better prepared and understand that if something does break, they understand and have the tools to fix it and get it up and running again. So you might protect your CIO's job if they do turn off the on-prem, because you're prepared, your team's prepared, and they're confident. So game days are, I don't see people adding that as part of their testing strategy. But I think game days are a really good way of getting the team ready for it when you do make that switch.
Confidence. That's just to build off that. That's such an important trait, and it's such an important thing to have. And it goes on to what we were talking about before. Mike was talking about the first to the 100th time. You're going to be doing this a lot, and you're going to be doing this testing forever. But especially if you're a big enterprise company where maybe you're used to testing, you're doing a lot of manual testing, right? The thing about your cloud migration and going forward is that you're going to need to be automated. You got to be doing perhaps a lot more automation on your testing than you've been currently on-prem. And so how do you get confident in that? You start now, start early, start building so that as you're ready to go, you know if you need new tools, if you need new practices, you're getting that experience now, so that when it's time to go, you do have that confidence to know that your testing will be successful. You will be addressing the risks. That you're not trying to do too many new things all at once, right? You're starting to master some of the skills and the techniques and the tools that you'll need to be successful in your cloud migration and beyond. So starting that early is a huge step towards building that confidence.
And one of the things that I would add to this is, I always think I think I mentioned engineering points earlier. Every app, every infrastructure, every kind of technology sort of has those things that we know that it's hypersensitive to login time. It's very sensitive to latency in these kind of environments. It's very sensitive to whatever for our apps, right? And so you engineer the architecture of your application knowing that those are constraints that you're going to need to work with. And for me, those are the exact things that I want to test first up in the cloud. Like, I don't need to move the whole app and test the whole app. I want to go up and test, okay, is my identity management and authentication, all that happen quickly? Because I may be doing machine-to-machine identity authentication. It's got to happen very quickly. And what can I expect? How does it behave? And what do I need to know about it when I move my app fully up there? So those kind of design points, or those engineering points, I think are some of the most important things to test. It doesn't have to be first, but at least in parallel with your testing functionality and performance and the other things. Kind of ultimately, performance doesn't matter if the critical things don't perform well, because the rest of it won't anyway.
And I'll get back to some. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I wanted to again bring it back around to a point I think I made when we first started the discussion, right? There are people that know how to do this. So, and there's the whole penny wise, pound foolish thing. And again, there are going to be a bunch of shysters out there too. So, you want to make sure that you're doing your homework about whatever service provider you have, coming in to do this. But there are folks, there are playbooks, there are, kind of tooling kits. There are, all this stuff exists. And if you're sitting there, going to learn in the school of hard knocks, right? You're an idiot. I mean, I can't say it any other way.
No, you're going to pay idiot taxes. That's exactly what you're going to do.
No, you've seen it.
Speaking of this, Jonathan, so look, you are from Tricentis, so I got to put you on the spot. Does Tricentis have a specific cloud migration kind of testing recommendation, group of tests, product line? Where can we get help from Tricentis here?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, so we do have, and depending on what you're migrating, we might have a different set of tools, right? The idea is that not one tool is going to fit all use cases, but we do have end-to-end continuous testing with Tricentis Tosca, which lets you take your current on-premise and make sure that you can use the same test cases as you're moving forward into the cloud. That's codeless automation, so less technical debt, less technical maintenance required to create and upkeep those. We've got performance testing tools, and with SAP, we have an impact analysis tool, change intelligence tool called Live Compare, which is actually really helpful in S/4HANA cloud migrations because it can tell you exactly what you have now, what's changing, and what you need to test. So really, we work closely with SAP. Also on their roadmaps for their RISE programs and their S/4HANA cloud migrations, and we're building in the best practices that we've learned from our customers, and SAP has learned, and how to fit these tools in at the right times, in order to make sure, again, that no one's paying that idiot tax. We've seen enough migrations by now to know, what to do and what not to do, and so building those into the actual methodology that SAP recommends is a project that's ongoing now, so that we can help everybody have the most successful migration possible.
Fair. Just go to tricentis.com and look for that. Okay, fair enough. Guys, we're almost out of time here. First of all, thank you, Tracy, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And thank you. Well, now, Jonathan, thank you. Mitchell, Mike, thank you. Special thanks to Tricentis, as always, for sponsoring DevOps Unbound. Mitch, if you don't mind, I'm gonna let you take the last word.
I think we hit on a lot of great learnings. We said best practices, probably learnings is as valuable as the best practices, and leveraging that from a partner that can help you, whether it's technology like a testing, cloud-friendly testing, as well as on-prem testing, to someone that can help you estimate your costs, what you think what your environment's gonna cost you moving to the cloud as you migrate in pieces or in whole. So I think there's so much information and so much more expertise available now that I would leverage. Stand on the shoulders of giants. Don't try to build a new giant. And I think you'll get along a lot farther faster.
Agreed. I think all those partners who claim to be gold and platinum partners of the various cloud providers, there's a reason why they're gold and platinum. And the whole idiot tax thing it's a key takeaway here, man. This is not something at this stage of where the market is. There's no reason to be doing this yourself. There's just no reason. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon on another DevOps Unbound. And until then, this is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong TV. Take care.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, we're live at the Open Source Summit in Europe, in Dublin. We're here with Patrick Sheehan, aptly named. Good place for him to be. Patrick is the Chief Revenue Officer for Phylum. We're going to be talking about open source security. You guys have been at this for a while now. Everybody started talking about it in huge amount of conversations about it in the last 9 months, but you guys have been at it for longer than that.
Yep.
So my question to you is, what challenges are there that need to be resolved? Because it seems like we are putting out calls to solve particular issues, but I sometimes wonder if some of the vendors have already solved some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And delighted to be here. Thank you for having me, Mike. To your direct question, yeah, we've been doing this for about 2 years now. I think someone said it's always good to start a company about a year or 8 months before an event happens. We were that way. So we started just before the supply chain attack started happening, namely the SolarWinds attack. So we had started identifying the challenges that existed. And then all of a sudden it came to the forefront with some of the recent attacks. So, fundamentally we believe that in order to secure modern software development, there's more to look at than licenses and vulnerabilities. So really taking a look at a broader approach to the market, right, which is a little differentiated from maybe some of the tools that have been existing in years gone by. We're purpose-built for the problem that we're trying to solve. So it's been an interesting learning experience over the last few years.
Is this a platform that I buy and install as if I'm the DevOps team? And how does that get integrated with my workflows? Because, DevOps teams are pulling open source code off the web 19 times a day.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, this is a paradigm shift. What Phylum is trying to do is shift the paradigm. I think the tools that have been out there and the approaches have been good for a period of time. And now it's a matter of really taking a look at how do we drive successful outcomes for the security organizations that are trying to manage risk and the developers who are trying to keep pace with the business release cycles. Compensation drives behavior, and we're not necessarily aligned. We hear about this organizational friction that exists in the marketplace. So one of the things that I think we had a late mover advantage of, and again, kind of coming into the space a little bit later than maybe some of the existing tools that are out there or in AppSec, is we had those two personas in mind when we built the platform. So how do we shift further left so that we are not interrupting the developer workflow, and at the same time as allowing the organization, namely the AppSec or DevSecOps programs, set policy and guardrails about what is acceptable use of the OSS packages that ultimately is fueling innovation. So with those two types of use cases and failures of the last, or challenges that exist over the last 2 decades, have been in the space quite a while, the idea is we've got to be integrated into the developer tooling in order for them to really adhere to the challenges and the policies that are ultimately set by that. So the way that we're developed, to your direct question, is we are sitting in line with into the CID, CD, we are integrating into all of the developer tools, right, and namely the CI/CD build process. We also have a deployment mechanism where we're actually even further left than the developer actually doing package installation. And we're seeing that developers are actually the targets of most of these malware attacks in the software supply chain. So that deployment mechanism for Phylum is something that's new and getting a lot of traction with the conversations we've been having.
Who's taking the lead on funding all this stuff? Because to your point, there's not a lot of love lost between cybersecurity people and developers. Often they kind of tend to point fingers at each other.
Yeah.
So who is it that is taking charge of this funding of these projects? Because developers don't tend to fund security. But the security guys tend to go, I thought the development team was doing that.
Yeah, great question. We see typically our entry point is through the security organization. Product security, application security, CISO, things of that nature. They understand that this is the risk that they're trying to ultimately own, and they own the budget for maybe some existing tools. Now that being said, the mature organizations that have already experienced a lot of that friction, during our engagement process, we do proof of values and things of that nature, they're bringing in the development teams. Some mature organizations have a developer experience team, so they're kind of sitting as that, hey, before you do anything to the golden goose and the revenue generating machine over here with all your security whiz-bang stuff, let's just make sure that it's purpose-built, that it's not interrupting what ultimately is innovation. And we know, being in the space a long time, revenue will trump risk any day of the week. So we had to balance those two use cases. But security is the entry point, and there's a lot more collaboration with the developers given the problem that they're both trying to solve.
We talk a lot about shifting left, but it's not clear to me that developers really want to know a lot about security. The truth of the matter is security was an elective. Most of them didn't take it. So They just want to write code and do their thing.
Yeah.
So how transparent can we make all this stuff so that, we can quote unquote shift left, but it's more like maybe we're leaning left.
Yeah, leaning left. This is a true shift left. And in the conversations that we're having with the development organizations, it's all changed. But even the last 4 months, we're seeing that about 90% of the malware attacks that is getting inserted are targeted at the developer workstations. They're quick hits. So they've felt the pain in the issues of credential harvesting or being attacked and being, having that malicious code be downloaded. So the awareness level of the developer, whether they like it or not, is rising, coupled with the fact that most organizations are trying to get their arms around acceptable open source use. So yes, the developers are people that want to be left alone, and we better be conscious of that. But what we're trying to do is, this is where the paradigm shift comes in. If we can actually be deployed before the developer ever pulls down that package, we're actually alleviating a lot of the remediation gaps, this whack-a-mole that we've been facing for 20 years. That paradigm shift is very difficult sometimes to people to comprehend because change management's hard. But I will say the developers are more aware of this now. They're actually understanding because they felt the pain of maybe some of these recent attacks. That is shifting the tide in our direction to say, why don't we think about this problem differently? And bringing those two organizations together for common goals. So far, so good. I think that, it's still early days. A lot of mature organizations are feeling it out, but the developers haven't been pushing back too much because they've actually been more aware of the problems.
One of the dirty secrets of our business is that there are billions of vulnerabilities in existing applications. They're not all equally lethal, but do you think that as we go along that people will start to replace those applications and we'll see a lot more activity, not just building net new applications, but actually going back in to rewrite legacy applications to go get rid of large swaths of those vulnerabilities?
Great question. I don't know. I mean, I've worked in the financial institutions that still have COBOL, right? And they never changed that despite, the challenges and lack of people being able to know those systems. We're seeing new languages pop up. There's a lot more technologies where people in containers are using different languages, right? So yeah, there's thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities, if not millions. I think it's a matter of really addressing some of these vulnerabilities as much as you can retroactively, but doing a better job of, as you're including new packages and new builds, making sure that you really have a better hygiene to alleviate the problems moving forward.
All right, so get out your crystal ball.
Okay.
We have this phrase DevSecOps, and everybody kind of trips over it. So
yeah.
At what point down the road will we just not need the phrase DevSecOps because people will know security enough that we'll just have DevOps?
I will say we're probably 5 to 7 years away from that. I've been talking about this for quite some time. I said, how are we ever going to, there's 1 million jobs available, but yet you have network engineers and network security engineers. If security can be ingrained in the fabric of the company, big ask, but then I think we alleviate a lot of the challenges. Why shouldn't we just do things securely versus doing them unsecurely and having someone check our work? I think we're probably 5 to 7 years conservatively in that becoming a reality where security is just ingrained in the process.
All right. So maybe someday we could have like security reliability engineers the way we have SREs today.
Exactly.
And they're part of the whole workflow, but they're not getting in everybody's way.
Yeah, I think thinking about this problem differently. Spent a lot of time in this space. I had a company doing risk advisory previously. Change is hard, and getting the business to really understand that risk management's important, let alone security management, right, in cyber and things of that nature. That's not just an IT problem, that it's actually a business driver and a business detractor, will take some time. But I think the awareness and the attacks and a lot of these things have shifted the board conversation, which ultimately trickles down to the organization over time. That being said, I think we've got some work to do. 5 to 7 years would be my Miss Cleo prognostication.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Change is coming. Patrick, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Hey, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a minute.
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Cody J. Brown here with some more upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. Tomorrow, Wednesday, November 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern, speakers from AWS and Sysdig are joining us for Threat Detection and Response for AWS Fargate. We'll discuss the challenges of securing serverless environments and the benefits brought forward by AWS Fargate. Immediately following on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on Container Journal, protecting Azure workloads with Metallic Data Management as a Service. Speakers from Metallic will cover the entire hybrid cloud, including virtual machines, Kubernetes, structured and unstructured data, and databases. And jumping to Thursday, November 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Sentinel-1 is going to debunk the common myths about XDR, Extended Detection and Response. XDR has been receiving a lot of buzz, but there's not much clarity on what exactly XDR encompasses. Our speakers will give their takes, and as the title of the program notes, debunk some myths along the way. That's all I've got for you right now, but we do have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, so stay tuned.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
The program at Boca Code was amazing.
My career has completely changed from barely being able to, hold down a job to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Boca Code has built me up.
If you grant me the scholarship, like I said, I will share my knowledge with people, with women or immigrants.
Dreamed of having the opportunity to show the world, how great, I can be.
I feel that anything I do my best in, so wherever I end up, I'm going to do the best I can to make sure I'm making a positive impact. So this scholarship would definitely assist me in changing the trajectory of my life.
Excited to tell Carly about her winning. She is so pumped to really embark on her career as a software engineer. All right, Carly, we got the whole camera crew with us. All right, come on in, guys. We're coming in. Carly, I'm sorry, your name?
Harold.
Harold?
Yes.
So we're making this presentation of $10,000.
You got it? Yeah.
Puppies.
Is this?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Camera.
Huh? What?
Puppies coming over here. Hey, how you doing? Donald, we're here. Hey, man. How are you? I want to present you with this.
Oh, my gosh.
We had a tough time. We couldn't pick the finalists. You guys are all great. You're really great engineers. So you're in.
Oh, my gosh. Awesome. Thank you so much. This is a very awesome opportunity, and I look forward to strive for the best. Awesome. Thank you.
You're going to be a great engineer, man. Thank you so much, Donald. This was by far the strongest class of people we had who applied for the scholarship. We were able to get it down to 3 finalists, but then in meeting with the judges, we couldn't pick a winner. So what we decided to do is just pick all 3 finalists as winners, and so we want to make this contribution to your life. And we're going to award Stephanie Sanchez as one of our 3 Spring 2022 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship. Stephanie, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, CEO of Techstrong Group. We are a tech media company based here in Boca Raton, Florida, and we have been for 8 years. I've been a resident of Boca Raton for 20 years now, and it's always been one of my hopes, aspirations, is that South Florida would become a tech hub. So we opened this program, it's called Engineering the Change, to underserved communities including women, people of color, but any underserved community in the tech space, right? When I look back, and we have some of the past winners here with us, and I look at the difference it's made in the community, in their lives, it's something to be really proud of.
So, one of the things that Boca Code really takes is partnerships with companies like Techstrong and other local companies, because we need them to, to help support the school, and we need them to, to hire and interview our students as well.
I'm going to introduce some of our past winners and just have them briefly talk a little bit about, how their life has gone since taking this class.
When I received the scholarship, I had a lot of mixed emotions. I was scared but excited for this new chapter. I had worked in the tech industry, but I had never been in an engineering role. The people at Boca Code, Todd, who I affectionately call Coach, because I kind of think of him as the coach in a game, they guide me step by step the whole process. When I graduated from the cohort, I had over 10 offers from tier 2 and tier 1 tech companies, and I had my pick, which was the first time in my life I really had to make a choice where it was completely my decision.
The scholarship changed my life, really from 0 to 100. As I said before, I was in a state that I was really lost in terms of my career. I had a neuroscience degree from FAU, but I couldn't get a job. Once I got the scholarship and I did the 10 weeks at Boca Code, it completely changed my life to better, because now I have found actually my passion, which is not just tech, but being able to help women get into this field.
Winning the scholarship was once in a lifetime opportunity to change my career. The program at Boca Code was amazing. I studied a lot of fundamentals of software engineering, and I proved myself that I'm capable of being a successful developer. At that time, I couldn't even imagine how I would need this job in 3 months when the war hit my homeland, Ukraine, and this salary of software developer gave me opportunity to help Ukrainian people in this hard time.
So this year, we wound up with 3 finalists for the scholarship, and we brought them into our panel of judges, and each of the finalists were interviewed. And then the judges got together and we had to pick just one. We tried to pick just one, and we really couldn't pick just one. And they were 3 outstanding candidates. And so what we've decided is to give all 3 of them scholarships. First person is Carly Dorless.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. So
I'll hold the check for you.
I will do my best to be successful and to help other women and other people.
Our next winner of the Engineering the Change Scholarship for 2022 is a gentleman named Donald Vizio, and Donald will tell you his story. Donald, come on up.
First of all, I want to thank Techstrong, Todd, for introducing me to the scholarship. And, this is an amazing opportunity coming from Haiti. And I hope with this opportunity that Techstrong and Todd introduced me to, I hope to introduce it to others just like myself and give back to my community and show them that, software engineering is cool. It's not just for nerds.
Our third winner for this year's Engineering the Change Scholarship is Stephanie Sanchez.
First of all, thank you both for this opportunity, and congratulations to my fellow recipients. I know we're going to make a significant change in the world. I come from a background of social work, and so I hope to be able to continue to put the people aspect in technology as we help others around us. I'm so grateful to be able to be a part of this. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Mike Rothman. I am General Manager of Techstrong Research, Chief Strategy Officer of Techstrong Group, and we are here for another Techstrong Research review. Yes, I still have my bionic knee. So besides all of the, kind of fancy background, I'm not propped up in bed. I'm actually sitting at the kitchen table now, so you can't see that. So we are making progress on the rehab side.
Steve
so
Austin,
that is
by the
great
way.
news. It will be better. And they can rebuild it. I'm not quite sure it cost $1 million. It's not out, or $6 million, right? It's not that crazy yet.
Just racking it up slowly.
Mitchell, welcome. How are you?
Good. Mitch Ashley, the CTO with Techstrong Group and principal working with Mike on Techstrong Research. So good to be here with you, Mike, yet again.
You bet. So we've got a lot going on. And in the Techstrong, it's always, kind of juggling a whole bunch of different things between our, media business and the events that we do and the research that we have going on. We've always got, kind of a lot of stuff, but now especially there's a lot of balls in the air. And it's not just the ongoing research projects that we're constantly doing. And obviously, if anybody's interested in that, kind of reach out and let us know. We're happy to chat with you about what we can do and our research capabilities. But we're gearing up for Predict. And that's our annual conference where we really talk about where we think things are going in the next year. That'll be January 12th. So put that in your calendar. You can actually register now. We're putting our trends in place, and all of that is starting to come together. But before we get there, Mitch, I know that there was another breach, right? Another day, another dollar, another breach. But this one, kind of highlights a lot of the things that we've been talking about, and I think is a good segue to what we're going to spend most of our time on, which is KubeCon.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're, of course, software supply chain is, up near the top of the list now. And we keep talking about it because it's real. And talking about another breach seems like, ho-hum kind of stuff. But actually, it was Dropbox, just a couple of days ago when this airs, will be about a week ago. And this is developers got phished. And they got credentials to get into GitHub, and they stole 130 repositories, with keys and tokens. Excuse me. And it's took some data, and we'll just learn more over how much of customer data. But now we're talking about people's files on the that they use for everyday stuff, not just I found a document with your credentials in it. Not that isn't bad enough, but it points again that the developers are part of the supply chain. It's like hijacking the truck by compromising the truck driver. Well, in this case, it's hijacking the software by hijacking the software creator. And it just yet another. And by the way, phishing isn't just for those uneducated, non-technical users that don't know better. Anybody and everybody can be phished, and it does happen. And their target, it was a Circle CI email. That's what it looked exactly like it, and said, "We need you to do this to update your keys." Yes, they did up their keys to the hackers. So it's real, and it's effective, and it's fooling developers too.
It's fully, and again, so we can point on developers and that, brings up another topic that I'll hit in a second, right? But it's still, and we keep, kind of harping on the importance of training our folks, of course, right? The importance of protecting, their devices, of course, right? But it's the constant diligence. And now that we live in a SaaS type world, right, you've got to have some intelligence and some monitoring in terms of a lot of those SaaS-oriented platforms and products that we have our critical intellectual property in, right? So that's one thing, is that it's not just the developers, right? That could be somebody in finance, that could be anybody who has access to sensitive stuff, especially if it's in a SaaS environment. If they get there, they get those credentials, they're in the SaaS backend, right? It could be Office 365. A lot of cases, it is Office 365 on that front. So making sure that we've got, again, adequate protection for those folks is critical. But then there's this is a little bit of a compound attack, right? In that it wasn't just going after the developer. The developer gave access to, kind of the back end, which opened up, kind of the repositories and a lot of their core intellectual property from a supply chain standpoint. That's there. So is it really a supply chain attack? Right? They're not necessarily going after the components that Dropbox would have used in their environment. So it is a little bit more run of the mill, but it does highlight the fact that, both our employees continue to be vulnerable because they are human. And as we move towards more of these SaaS-based platforms, the diligence that's required around monitoring the activity within those platforms is absolutely critical. But I know we do want to kind of segue, leveraging the supply chain aspect of that to, well, you saw at KubeCon, obviously with, kind of the bionic knee, I was not able to go to Detroit, which is
not quite that
huge
bionic,
disappointment. Yeah, exactly. Waiting for the skin graft to take before I can, kind of launch it at 60 miles an hour quite yet. But, so I'm very disappointed to miss Detroit. So I've had to take my, kind of insights in terms of what the story is about from you and Alan and a lot of the videos. We have 40 some odd interviews that are going to hit Techstrong TV over the next week, I believe. So a lot of activity from KubeCon, a lot of really great conversations about where things are going. So again, Mitch, give us a little sense. You can start with supply chain. You can start pretty much anywhere you want in terms of what we saw there.
Let's touch on supply chain since that's kind of what we began with, and then we'll broaden out a bit. But there's a lot of interest and activity around. JFrog's led this project called Persia that they basically got started. I learned about it. I think they announced it back at Valencia and KubeCon Europe. North Europe, and it's the idea of where's your software coming from? Well, one of the things that blockchain does is validate where transactions come from, things that go on the ledger, et cetera. And so they're actually applying blockchain technology, and they've grouped together with a number of companies to create a network, a blockchain network and a process. And there were some more announcements around Persia and taking it to the next level. By the way, it's spelled Pyrsia, right, if you want to look it up. So a lot of attention around that. And then also a lot of attention around the open source security foundation, another foundation within the Linux Foundation group, and starting they have a new end user working group. End users are end users of open source software, so developers and people like that. And how do we consume open source software? So on one end, how do you create secure open source software and create processes around it? It's an exciting area, and I've had several conversations with folks there. So it's a interesting area for us too. But software and the security of software and how it's created is definitely a big theme. Probably overshadowed a lot by open telemetry and the
operational aspects of making kind of cloud native infrastructure kind of work
cloud native
at this point.
Kubernetes and so I don't know if you want to add anything to the supply chain part of it. That was the let's kind of and I think the operationalization aspect of things is
kind of interesting to me as well. And again, not that the supply chain is not interesting. It's absolutely critical, especially as we've been saying for quite a long time, right? We are assembling, we are really kind of aggregating a lot of different components that we're using to form modern applications, right? So we don't build, I don't know, Mitch, what do you think? Do we even build 60, 40%, some percent, that's increasingly becoming a minority is stuff that we're actually coding from an application standpoint.
Interesting.
It's really assembling and integrating. Yeah. And so obviously, kind of diligence and protection and monitoring of those components will increasingly be critical. But again, as we look towards 2023, as we kind of continue to expect the adoption curve to accelerate around cloud native technology, one of our themes, right, for Predict 23 is the long march. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's this idea that, and you kind of brought up the LAMP stack when we were chatting about this in one of our other meetings, right? It took a decade for the LAMP stack to become established as kind of the web platform, right? So cloud native infrastructure is not going to get there overnight, right? So now in 23, we start to embark on that long march towards, really a cloud native centric infrastructure for how we're hosting and delivering and deploying applications moving forward. And I think operationalizing that and building a lot of the enterprise readiness around some of these technologies that, again, not that large enterprises aren't doing it, they certainly are. Right. But for it to become more accessible to everybody, right, you have to have a level of enterprise capability in order to drive that. And I think that's kind of where we expect a lot of activity in 23 around that, kind of enterprisiness of the projects and really a lot of the technologies that we're seeing.
Well, with every innovation, we have the innovation, and then comes later how are we going to run this, and how are we going to secure it, right? As it becomes real, right. That's the operationalization of that, right? It's interesting. Well, I think that there's a lot of stats around how much new development is cloud native. The majority of it is when we talk about going to the people building apps in the cloud. And I think one of the things that's different about cloud native than maybe if you compare it to the LAMP stack, for example, is, that's a components of software, what the database, your MySQL, whatever you're using. Right. In this case, it's a software architecture too. It's microservices, right? And you're putting them in containers, and you're using things to manage those containers, right. Kubernetes, but you're redesigning how you're building apps. So it's almost like the monolith to service-oriented architecture to microservices long march that we're on in parallel with the underlying kind of technology stack that it's running on. So it's pretty, but it's real. I mean, if you go to one of these KubeCon conferences, it's pretty overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, it's here, and people are doing it, and it's not just hyped up by the analysts and the vendors and marketing departments and everybody. Yeah, that's happening too.
Which is interesting, right? Because we're starting, and that's something that, again, let's call it experienced as opposed to being old guys, right? But being experienced,
wise. I think it's wisdom.
Wise, in this space. We've seen that, right? In that when new, really disruptive innovations start to hit, it's when it's when we stop talking about it, right? It's when it's not as shiny. That's really when things start to happen, right? That's when you start to hit the inflection point, when it's less shiny. And again, one of the things, so we talked about the long march being kind of our theme, for cloud native infrastructure. The theme for DevOps is long live DevOps, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're starting to hear people, DevOps is dead and all that. And that's total nonsense. Alan wrote a great piece on DevOps.com, about that. But to me, that's an indication that DevOps has won, right? Because when you stop talking about it, it's become integrated into the processes. I can't tell you how many different projects and assessments and program design efforts, just me and Rich, right? We're involved in, kind of prior to me joining Techstrong, where it's happening in their environment, and they're really trying to figure out, how do I get my arms around this, right? How do I secure it? And these are not small companies, right? And it's not an easy transition. We were talking to very large, very staid, very conservative organizations. They've got architects that are working on all these things, and it's going to take them years to get there. But the fact is, they've started that journey. And once companies like that start the journey, it don't stop, right? There's no way to kind of take it offline at that point. Waterfall was okay, and we're going to go back to that, right? I mean, they're building all these, linkages. They're starting to leverage the foundation. They've got their policy documents and their tool chains that they're starting to develop. And that's really when we stop talking about it, because it's not so shiny anymore, because big, conservative, slow moving, kind of risk averse companies are starting to do this stuff. Well, then it's not so exciting, right? It's not the, leading edge. And so we want to talk about other things. We want to talk about WASM. We'll get there, maybe not today, but, something else. And certainly at Predict, we're going to spend a decent amount of time at kind of new potential disruptive technology. In fact, we're introducing in January, we'll be introducing what we're calling the Techstrong Tech to Track right? So these are a set of in each of our 4 different areas. These are sets of technologies to keep our eye on, right? They're not here today, right? But they're emerging and something that we should be paying attention to. WASM, being part of that. But really that's kind of to try to break this, we need an alternative to cloud native infrastructure, right? There's other alternatives in DevOps, platform engineering or SRE or some of these other, kind of replacements, to DevOps. And again, to me, those are all just indications that the game's over, right? DevOps is won, and now it's just a matter of, kind of starting to integrate those processes into, kind of how it is that we do things. And you kind of felt that momentum at KubeCon?
Absolutely.
That folks were there?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things, and we're actually having a DevOps Unbound panel. I think the title of it is something like can you really do cloud native without DevOps? I think it's pretty much required, right? Everything
is that today's? I think we're recording today.
Yeah, that's being recorded. And
good. I was invited to do that, and I didn't know what we were talking about. So that's nice
what it's that. So now you know. And the whole DevOps thing is dead. That's just clickbait. I did a clickbait way back when on Microsoft's new phone technology is going to replace Apple. I was actually just pissed off at Apple about something, so I wrote an article on Network World, and
not so pissed off that you bought an Android, but
no. I mean, I got fireballed for it, but I had the biggest hits I've ever had on an article, at least at that time. That's just clickbait. That's like, give me a break. You're not real. Okay. Yeah. Something's going to replace it. Sure, it's going to evolve, but like all our technology or all our, we still do Agile. We still do waterfall. Things never go away. They just evolve into being parts of other things.
I'll let you know a secret, Mitch.
Yeah.
Companies still run the big iron, right? There are still mainframes operationally happening, storing data. And it's actually pretty critical data, on that.
Your secret is some of it's still running my code from the 80s. So yes,
that's scary. And honestly, if you're in Canada, how you get your bill from Bell may actually be code that I wrote back in the early 90s. So that is terrifying on that front. But
so let me get back to KubeCon, because I think I had an interesting conversation. We did a SRE show panel there at our booth, at our Techstrong booth, where we're doing interviews. And we were reflecting back to about 3 years ago when everybody really was live, not Valencia, but whatever the last show was that everybody did together as a KubeCon show. And at that time, they were talking about SRE, kind of hoping that it might catch on. I mean, the book had been written, and it's real at a few places, but is it really going to be a thing? And they were talking about how open telemetry was, it's merging with open tracing, and would this really catch on with the vendors, and reflecting to where we are and how much had happened in the short span of 2.5, 3 years. Fast forward, and it's like, a lot of our hopes and dreams have actually come true in some of those areas. And you could say the same thing for Kubernetes and cloud native. We have entered it's not mainstream as in replacing everything. It's in mainstream of what new apps and everything's being built around.
Yeah.
But even
it started to become the platform of choice when folks are building out these stacks.
Cloud stack. You're going to think of it that way. So that was definitely a theme. Mike, I think something else is just the power behind the Cloud Native Foundation and momentum, more so than power, but momentum behind Cloud Native Foundation and the Linux Foundation. They have really put together something very powerful, a way of helping and supporting projects and keeping them going. It isn't there's the occasional closet developer that wrote the monitoring tool that turns into something, and they keep it alive themselves until they can't stand it anymore. And then, is it going to live or die? Now you turn it in, you really put some power behind it, put some muscle behind it, and structure and people and process and all of that kind of thing. And it's an impressive thing to watch, because it's real, and it really does make a difference.
It is. And what it does is it helps accelerate the adoption, right? It starts to accelerate the embrace of these technologies, because it's just easier to do, right? It's not the old days. It's not, kind of the vendor lock-in. It's not, And again, part of what we're talking about that we expect to happen in 2023 is that a lot of those supporting capabilities, whether it's education, whether it's management, whether it's operationalization, whether it's security, performance monitoring, a lot of these things start to gel around the base technology, which again makes it more palatable for larger, more risk-averse, conservative organizations to really start embracing this kind of environment. But again, we won't be done in 23, right? We won't be done in 24. We won't be done in 25, right? That's why we're calling it, the long march from that standpoint. But and again, I think that unless you're playing, ostrich, right? Kind of in terms of how you build and deploy technology is largely going to be DevOps and, DevOps everywhere and DevOps to the edge. And a lot of the things that we're talking about at DevOps Experience in a couple of weeks, kind of manifest that. And we've got, kind of this long march towards the, adoption of real cloud native infrastructure as that, kind of cloud application stack. And what we're going to be doing both at Techstrong Group as well as within Techstrong Research is really kind of documenting and getting out ahead of, kind of these trends. And that's kind of, listen, we're not one of the big, research shops. We're not, out there trying to cover every single thing. So when you see our trends, it's really going to be focused on this intersection of the areas that we focus on, right? Starting with digital transformation as the catalyst to start looking and driving these technologies, cloud native infrastructure as the underlying foundation and enabling technologies. DevOps is how you do things, and security as, kind of that layer to protect all of that intellectual property and key corporate asset, information assets that show up on these platforms. And that's kind of the agenda for what it is that we're looking forward to, both at Predict in January and every week, right? When Mitch and I and we'll let you know another little secret. We do this early on Friday mornings, right? So, we have our little internal research meeting early on Friday morning. So we're a little rusty, and we went out and watched the football game on Thursday nights. It could be a little rusty and that kind of thing. But yeah, so by the time you guys see this, it's another week. And again, we're excited because there's just a lot of really cool stuff happening in a lot of different areas. And Techstrong is at the front end of really covering and carving out what this means to, enterprises large and small alike.
Well, and for you and I personally, it's a place where we're working together now, but we've shared some key things that I think we hold important. And that is really being practical about how to use this stuff and what does it mean to you, not, pontificating about, the next greatest thing of whatever hype wave or murky quadrant or wacky wave or whatever the heck you want to call it. We don't do that stuff. We're not rating, not doing those ratings, but we are really being very practical about, we think this is going to be real. This is real today, and what some of the challenges or opportunities or whatever those are. So the Predict 2023 will be the launch. When you talked about tech to watch is really some of our own research that's not funded by other people. We're doing it ourselves. And it's something you've been doing for a long time in your career, a little bit newer to me, but
it's not great. And like some of the other guys have like cool vendors, right? We're not doing, it's really about technology. So Dragon, yes, we'll talk about the companies that are, kind of leading the way in those areas, but it's really about kind of the sector and how that's going to impact the environment. And again, we're going to update that on a quarterly basis. So it's going to be something that we've got in front of you at all times in order to, ensure that you understand kind of what you have to be paying attention to. Right. And that's our job is to be out there. Right. We're not, kind of early majority, even, kind of late majority type folks. By that time, the backward looking indicators, the other big research shops, they're all over that stuff. We want to be out on, kind of the front end of, kind of adoption trends and really new technology environments. And again, that's just very exciting to me. Again, being an old guy and having seen this, stuff once or twice.
Well, by the way, I stopped counting birthdays. I know it's leveling up. I'm now at level 52 wizard.
Well, yeah, that's right. So, not getting any older. So great, Mitch. Appreciate the time. Again, love our internal research meetings. We get to wax poetic a little bit while everybody listens in. This will show up, of course, on Techstrong TV in the next couple of days. And next week we'll have something else to talk about because there's always something else to talk about.
And we'll see you soon. By the way, are you going to reInvent? I know I'm going, and you're going.
I will be at reInvent.
You'll get to see the bionic knee. So
yes,
reInvent,
the bionic knee will be at reInvent.
I bring that up because we're taking appointments, setting up meetings, and doing interviews also with Alan and folks at we have a suite where we're doing that stuff. So reach out to us, just info at Techstrong Research or info at Techstrong Group.
Or reach out to us directly if you're our pals. We're happy to hear from you.
Yeah, it's Mitchell and M. Rothman. So you can get us at techstrongresearch.com. Hopefully we'll see you at reInvent. So we'll see everybody there.
Appreciate it, Mitch. Appreciate everybody, being in here and listening to what we're waxing poetically about. And until next week, this is the Techstrong Research Review. We will see you later on.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Ravid Circus, who's Chief Product Officer for Simplicity. And we're talking about the current state of cybersecurity because it seems like we're being overwhelmed. There's more vulnerabilities than ever. There's not enough people to address this issue. And the question at the end of the day becomes, what's to be done about all this? So Ravid, the ball's in your court. How are we going to save ourselves from ourselves?
Thanks, Michael. It's actually a very good question. Being in the cybersecurity for so many years, I think we kind of seeing a big difference, a big shift in things over the last few years. So if you would look on the world of, risk management or risk reduction, like 6 or 7 years ago, it was all about vulnerability management. But if you look on this world today, you have vulnerability management and application security and cloud misconfiguration and cloud workload protection and SaaS security and many, many, many different programs that identify weaknesses, vulnerabilities, exposures in the security state of an organization. And the security team, probably the same security team, needs to handle all of that. Now, the big thing about it is that there are many programs. Each of them cover different layer of the security stack. Each of them has different score, different formatting. The only thing that is common to all those tools is the fact that the security team cannot fix any of this. The people that fix those problems are IT, developers, DevOps, and these people. So the security team are in a very, let's call it, special place where they have the responsibility but don't have the authority. They have the responsibility to get the organization more secure, but they don't have the authority to do so because they cannot go and patch a machine. They cannot go and reconfigure a cloud resource. So they are busy all day in driving remediation. They are busy all day in getting the people that can actually make those changes, use the data that come from the security tools, and they're actually handling all day, getting the findings from the tools to the people that can actually fix this problem. And in many organizations, this is done manually, fragmentedly, on a tool by tool basis. So I think the big thing is that we have more tools, more data, but the same security team that actually need to do the same things manually. So I don't know why we are surprising that it doesn't scale.
It seems like we're trying to enlist more people in the process. So you see IT operations teams taking over more security operations. You hear about the shift left to developers where they're going to be more proactive. Is that how we're going to deal with this ultimately? Is that we're going to essentially deputize everybody we can find who can work on a cybersecurity posse?
So I think it's part of the solution, but this part of the solution requires a lot of technology support. This part of the solution requires making security more self-service than it used to be. So if you want a developer to fix security things by his own, then he needs to have access to all that information. He needs to have transparency of that data, and he doesn't need to become an expert in each and every one of the security tools that the organization has. It needs to have a more notion of a self-service so the organization can actually being able to, let's call it, democratize security, being able to kind of move the responsibility to drive remediation from the people that are responsible to the security tools to the people that are responsible to fixing those. Now, I think the big irony is that if you look at it, no one can think about doing software development today without Jira or one of the equivalent technologies. No one can think about doing IT services, okay, without ServiceNow or Zendesk or one of the equivalent services, because those productivity platforms are the ones that enable that self-service notion. But for the security team, there is actually no such platform. There is no such platform that sits and takes the information from the different tools, lives in the security tool ecosystem, but also knows to create the notion of self-service to those operations, security operations, developers, the DevOps, and what have you. So we are back to relying on separate, disparate reports from different tools in different formats, something that is really the complete opposite of self-service.
Mm. Do these groups trust each other? I mean, it seems like the security people over the years have always thought of developers especially as maybe the root cause of some of their issues, and the IT ops guys don't have enough knowledge and don't pay enough attention. So how do we kind of get to the point where everybody is actually on the same team? So
I think that I say it this way, I would call it differently than trust. I do honestly believe that everyone in the organization wants the benefit of the organization. So I don't think that any of the people that needs to fix security issues don't fix them intentionally. I do think that there is a lot of friction in that process. And that friction is a result of too many tools, in too many security ratings, in too many formats, in too many alerts, in too many changing of prioritization between today and tomorrow, that at the end of the day put a lot of friction between the security teams that actually want to get things done and the people that actually are executing those programs. So I think that friction is something which is a result of manual processes, of a result that the security process is not part of the day-to-day of what the remediation teams are doing, pretty much because it's not transparent for them. It's not available for them. I'm coming from product management world, so my development teams has features that I want them to do. They have bugs of things that need to be fixed, but they don't have a security backlog because we are not able to communicate them the security backlog because it's in too many different places, too many different tools, too many different formats. If we were able to create for them, one distinct, harmonized security backlog, then there was features, there was bugs, and there was security backlog, and an engineering manager could have planned out how it's going to handle that. The reality is that it's always some kind of a firefighting, always some kind of okay, this has become a priority, let's stop everything and fix it right now. So I think the problem is the friction, and that friction caused both sides to kind of stand still in their positions of you need to fix everything right now, and on the other side, we cannot stop everything to fix security things, and no one moving on each side. So I think that the automations and technologies that we have in place today actually allows us to move away from that friction into more self-service, normalized backlog of security, something which is more transparent rather than the old-fashioned, this is the latest alert list, stop everything and fix those.
Speaking of automation, we hear a lot about AI, machine learning algorithms. Are these things for real? And what kind of expectations should we have? Or are they mainly, yet another security tool or widget that everybody kind of promotes, but nobody uses?
So I think that to say that AI and ML is not for real would be very, very harsh. I do think that automation many times is in the small things and not on the big things. It's not on necessarily applying some intelligence, but rather being able to do a lot of the things that was manually and cumbersome and do that rapidly and fast. I'll give you a quick example. One of my customers was telling me a story. The other day I was getting a finding about an issue on one of my code repositories. It took me about 2 hours to find out the person that is responsible for that repository and ask that to fix that immediately. And then he told me, so yeah, that 2 hours that were gone. But the day after, another finding came on the same repository, but this time I was on vacation and my colleague picked up this alert, and it took him the same 2 hours to figure out that it's exactly the same person. So, I don't know if it's an artificial intelligence or machine learning or whatever it is, but there is a lot of place for savings and for automation and for orchestration of many of the day-to-day manual tasks that security teams are doing with the lack of centralized platform that will actually do all of that for them. And I think that AI and ML can augment or can extend a good process which is already automated. It's not a replacement for the lack of process.
Are we seeing more vulnerabilities, or is it just kind of a matter of the fact that we're discovering more vulnerabilities that have always been there, but we're just recognizing the issue as the scope that it really is?
So I think there are a few things here. I think, first of all, the attack surface, the potential attack surface has grown exponentially. So, there is vulnerabilities, there is cloud misconfiguration, there is API security, there is SaaS security. There is a lot of new technologies and a lot of new domains, which potentially has exposures, vulnerabilities, findings, things that need to be fixed. So I think the world using today much more technologies in different aspects than it did 10 years ago. And for that extent, I think the attack surface by definition is bigger. I think that the concerns and the knowledge around security and the awareness for security issue has been raised, and you see programs like bug bounties and things like that actually encourage people to find more vulnerabilities. So we are, as industry, encourage people, and we are paying people to find vulnerabilities in our software, which is a good thing. But I think that the inability to fix is not related to the number of problems. It's more related to how you drive solutions, because many times those problems has the same solution or has a way to actually resolve that in a much more efficient and quicker way. And therefore, I really don't think it's the amount of problems. I think it's really how you handle the solutions and how you drive the processes that will make those problems go away.
Are we accumulating a level of security technical debt that's unsustainable because we have all these new platforms and new things to defend, and we don't have enough people? So, we could be at this for another decade just trying to fix all the stuff we already have, never mind the stuff that we're going to add.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'm not sure that they have the best answer for that. I do know that, when I practiced security, people was telling me, when you have vulnerabilities, let's prioritize that. We prioritize them based on whether they are already accessible from the internet, whether there is a known exploit to those vulnerabilities, or whether we were able to validate that it's really vulnerable through attack simulation or through a pen testing. But then I said, guys, but if we will prioritize by these three factors, if the answer for one of them is yes, we are already in a high risk. By definition, if it's public or it's exploitable or it was validated, it means that someone can actually use that. And we kind of try to fix that after we have validated that it can be used. So it's not easy to see that we are actually in a constant firefighting just because we decide to fix something when it becomes overly important. I think that one of the things that we as an industry need to do, and I think that we have a couple of steps still to do there, is to be able to better to create a more sustainable cadence in security remediation. So we will not fix all of them, never. We will never fix all of them. But if an organization knows that on an average, it will take him 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever it is, to recover from an outbreak of specific vulnerability or something like that, then the organization can also plan accordingly how he defends itself in the meantime. The problem is that it's very hard for security leaders today to understand, from the second I asked that to be fixed, how long before the organization is completely empty and clear. This is one of the things which are missing in the industry. And measuring that will actually help us to understand better how we are going to get rid of that backlog or manage our life with that security debt.
What is that one thing that you see organizations doing over and over again that just makes you shake your head and go, I cannot believe that we're still wrestling with this issue. And if we just did this one thing, we'd be halfway home?
Spreadsheets. It's kind of funny and embarrassing on the same time because I'm part of that industry and I was practicing that myself for many, many years. But one of the CISOs that I talked with said, if I will ever start another meeting and someone will say, who has the latest version of the vulnerability spreadsheet? I'm going to stop the meeting right away. But that's the reality. The reality is that in many, many places, we are kind of accepting the fact that we need to do that manually in a very tedious way in spreadsheets, rather than to look around us, look how they do that in software development, how they do that in IT services, how they do that in sales, how they do that in marketing, in HR. All of those domains have productivity platforms. Okay. Only the security team, for some reason, doesn't have that. So maybe we need to start thinking about that. Maybe we need to start thinking about security as a service, pretty much as IT, and ITSM is IT service management. Okay. And actually start to look at that as a service and what we can do in order to enable that service for the organization, rather than to just look on ourselves as defenders. And I think this way this thing might take, make a big difference in the way that organizations are managing their security and sharing their security state and driving other teams for improving the security across the organization.
All right. Well, it sounds like a lot of security teams are still, quote unquote, partying like it's 1999, and maybe they need to come up a few decades. Hey, Ravid, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Enjoy it.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Daniel Thanos, who's Vice President and Head of Arctic Wolf Labs, and we're talking about multi-factor authentication, but not so much the fact that everybody should get it and needs it, but we've already encountered fatigue with it. It's amazing. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Big fan of the show.
We have been telling people to adopt MFA for several years now with mixed success, but now it looks like people are actually starting to listen, and we're encountering a lot of this. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like a lot of it is done poorly, and people are getting somewhat annoyed. So, what is the right approach to this whole thing? Because how many times can I be asked to log into a website with a passcode sent to my phone before somebody figures out it's me?
Excuse me. Yes, that's a great question and kind of great framing of the issue. There has been considerable more uptake of MFA, but the reality is adversaries always learn to adapt, right? They learn to exploit weakness in technology and in humans. And in this case, the weakness they're exploiting, especially when you're doing kind of the more modernized solutions, which are essentially sending you a push to your phone and saying, hey, is that you? Just click yes, right? What they're doing is they're just flooding you to the point where someone gets really tired of it and just surrenders, and they literally just click yes. Or usually what happens is they think that they're clicking no, but because they've been doing it so many times, they ended up, touching yes, right? And so the bad guys have figured out that there's always going to be a certain percentage in your user population that if you annoy them enough, they're either by error or by just sheer exhaustion, they're gonna click that yes. So when it comes to those types of attacks, really there's like another tweak, if you will, on kind of like push type oriented MFA, and that is called number matching authentication on MFA. So if you've like used Microsoft Authenticator, for example, in the past or currently, you can enable an option where essentially it sends you a push, but that push is going to have like a number on it, right? Or it's going to ask you to select a number that goes along with the push. So therefore, you have to consciously, be in front of the service you're authenticating to match those numbers. And so therefore, if you're kind of like out and about and you're getting MFA fatigue, it's less likely you're going to pick the right number because you have no idea because you're not sitting in front of the service. And usually bad guys, once they understand that this is the type of thing that's enabled, they're not like, they're going to go off to another target because they know they're not going to get that easy yes in the process. And of course, there's many different types of MFA. You just alluded to one, which is like, you keep on getting an SMS code to your phone or whatever that you have to type in. Those types of attacks are kind of less susceptible to like fatigue-oriented attacks, but what they are susceptible to is far more potent attacks that have to do with like malware that you're going to get on a phone that will intercept those things, or fake apps which will kind of get you to kind of give over that code, so then they can kind of take over your account. There's many methods involved in that type of MFA. Such that obviously the push method is better, or our physical token is better. I always recommend for like highly mission critical or highly secure systems that you're having a hardware based token is like the 502 based token is not a bad thing, right? If it's like a highly privileged system, that's also something very good to look at if you want that extra piece of assurance.
Will therefore there be tiers of MFA processes that will be tuned to specific risk levels, or is there kind of like one MFA process that is better than others, and this is the one that will be most widely used, or is there just going to be a lot of MFA nuances here?
I think the reality is, as bad guys kind of shift tactics, it always just forces organizations and individuals to respond. What I will tell you is if you're doing like the number matching multi-factor, that's a pretty good approach, right? Because that gives you the convenience. It gives you the convenience of push. It makes it easy to kind of roll out in a large organization or a small organization. And it's not going to be kind of subject to this class of attack. And if you can get something like that, even if you're kind of going back to an app that kind of gives you like a one-time code or a one-time password that you have to type in, even that's better than kind of just clicking yes by default, because that's just becoming very easy for the bad guys to kind of get through. So yeah, like to answer your question, I still think that given the last two methods I discussed, it's still good enough to give you more than a pervasive level of protection. But in some organizations, again, that have like highly privileged systems, having that physical token is not a bad idea.
Have we reached some sort of threshold where everybody's basically saying the security situation has gotten to the point where we must absolutely have MFA, regardless of what kind of annoyance the end user receives, right?
Yeah, you have to, right? Because it's just not enough with passwords anymore. When you look at the vast majority of different types of attacks that happen over phishing, through ransomware, through account takeovers, all the automated type of attacks that we see, it just has proven that you absolutely need to have MFA as a base level of control. It's no longer sufficient just to kind of rely on legacy oriented passwords and password management. It just doesn't work anymore. And there's lots of reasons for this, regardless of how much an organization may educate users. The reality is a lot of users, even in the face of that education, they'll do silly things like take their credentials, corporate credentials, and use them on like public sites or less than secure sites or dodgy sites. And then those things get breached, and then it's trivial to kind of use that account in an attack. An initial access broker will sell that credential, then a ransomware provider will use that as an in. Definitely what we see is like a good portion of attacks can be mitigated successfully if you just used MFA.
Initially, there was a lot of concern about the end customer's experience, but I have to wonder also if that was a bit of a dodge, because MFA, for a lot of folks, they kept saying it's hard to implement, it's hard to manage, there's a lot of pieces. Is it getting simpler to implement, or where are we on that curve?
I think inevitably it's definitely much simpler than what it was, especially with the advent of things like smartphones and essentially all of this becoming software defined and pretty trivial to deliver. Yes, going back a couple of generations of the technology, that's true. Like it wasn't easy to do. But here's the thing: like this technology has also commoditized and consumerized, right? Like my father knows how to use two-factor authentication, right? And he's a senior, he's retired, and he has no problem using MFA. He knows what it is, and he's eager to do it. And so that to me is kind of like a good sign of where things have gone. If consumers can understand it, then a user and an enterprise can understand it as well and can use it. And the technology of a lot of the services that you kind of get built in these days, with a lot of, especially with public cloud service providers or many others, it's become a commodity. It's just there for you to use. And it's silly not to.
I think my father-in-law knows to hand the phone to my son when he wants to deal with this, but that's a different story. As we go along, we hear a lot about passwordless approaches to identity and identity management. So as you kind of look at this whole space, how do you think it will continue to evolve? I mean, is this a moment in time towards a greater thing that we're working towards? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I do think that's definitely the path that we're on. Essentially, push notifications are the beginning of that. And then just kind of having, cryptographic credentials that are kind of provisioned to specific assets together with dynamic push-based, together with some sort of challenge code type authentication, I think is where we're going to go. More use of biometrics as that technology kind of disseminates out to the broader industry. I think even just using the bio authentication on our various mobile devices will be something that even enterprises can begin to leverage. I see technologies kind of being baked into Microsoft's operating system and their facial recognition tech that's becoming more distributed out there. All of these factors combined together, I think, are what are going to drive passwords to kind of go away as a standard authentication over time.
what other techniques are the bad guys using to get around MFA? And, because clearly they're seeing this trend themselves. And I'm sure, other than brute force attacks that you described, are they up to anything else that we should be keeping an eye out for?
Well, I think right now, honestly, to be truthful, like depending on the class of MFA. So if you're like kind of using what I'd call more like first gen MFA or poor man's MFA, through SMS codes and emails and all that, well, that stuff they can already kind of tap and hijack with various types of, malware, or they can spoof a site and get you to, put in a code if it's like being dynamically generated, and that allows them to steal your session and do all types of stuff. So I'll kind of park that aside. That's kind of well known. We're kind of going to like these types of like, push oriented authentications where they're susceptible to MFA fatigue. Definitely that's where the action is right now. It is MFA fatigue, and to mitigate that, as we said, you want to essentially do that number matching, or kind of like an extra challenge, which just basically says, here's the push, which code is it? So you definitely want something like that, and I think that will take care of kind of what adversaries are doing for now. But the reality is, over time, we will have to see, right? Like, definitely, I've seen more exotic type threats that, for example, that can land on mobiles or that can land on desktops, where I wouldn't be too surprised if they kind of trigger an authentication, and then depending on what they've been able to put on your device, they may be able to grab screenshots, right, and kind of see what's appearing or what you're doing. So, we'll see kind of where things go, but I think that is pretty more exotic in nature. And I think right now, with where the tech is at, if you just enable this extra feature kind of found on a lot of these MFA systems, you'll be fine, I think, for the next little while.
I sometimes scratch my head because clearly I can be walking down the street by some store and somehow or other somebody knows that I might be interested in that. And I start getting stuff in my email and threads and text. So
that's a different issue.
Somebody knows where I am and can triangulate my location.
That's a different issue. Now we're getting into the issue of like privacy and data brokers. The reality is, and of course, Apple has been the one vendor I think that's made the most inroads into that area. But the reality there is that a lot of the apps we use get all types of access, and sometimes we're granting that access. Again, it's what I call I haven't paid 100% attention to kind of what I'm clicking on, but a lot of apps, when they install on your device, your phone, they ask for like a crap load of permissions, or like a lot of permissions, and people just say yes. They don't pay attention to what it's asking for. And basically what it's doing is you're handing it a lot of telemetry. You're handing it GPS telemetry. A lot of people click yes to allowing the app to run in the background and continually access their GPS. They're clicking yes to it, kind of looking at your browsing history and a whole bunch of other things. And then, of course, it quickly correlates when you're in front of a store based on your GPS location. And when you've given it access to your emails, SMS messages, and a whole bunch of other things, it quickly connects some dots and it flashes you an advertisement. And then there's someone in the data broker market that is basically bidding to get that data day in and day out in order to serve up that ad to you.
So can they use all that data they're already collecting to authenticate the fact that I am me and I'm accessing this thing already? Because it seems like they already have all that data.
Well, you bring up a good point in terms of the future. In terms of what that means. I've heard of authentication systems that are based on proximity, based on your gait and how you walk. Again, like if you're allowing something onto your device that's less than trusted, and you're giving it extraordinary access, it's not far-fetched to assume that adversaries will begin to figure out how to use that. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
All right. It's a never-ending game of spy versus spy. Daniel, thanks for being on the show.
All right. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our airing of the CD pipeline and DevOps Unbound, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Tech strong.